It's not going.
Hello, yes, I can hear.
Good evening. I call this meeting of the HRC to order at 6:43 on March 2nd, 2023. We apologize for the technical difficulty with our mics. Thank you for all being patient. So welcome here tonight. We appreciate you all being here, and I'm very excited about the work that we're going to do to help our community and the organizations that support it. Look forward to hearing from many of you in public comment and learning about the work that you do. Agenda copies are available if anyone needs a printed agenda copy. Over here, right over here in the front. If you would like to make a public comment, please complete a blue speaker card. Cards are located in the front of the room as well. Please indicate the name you would like to be called when it is your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one blue speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them into staff as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. If you are speaking in support of a specific funding recommendation under item 6.1, please note that on the speaker card. Please also note that this meeting will be broadcast live on KMVT and on the city's YouTube channel. The next item on the agenda is roll call. I will now ask the Principal Management Analyst to take attendance by roll call.
Thank you, Chair Sylvester. Commissioner Baird? Present. Commissioner Poicon?
Present.
Commissioner Smith? Present. Commissioner Webb?
Present.
Vice Chair Nokidu?
Present.
Chair Sylvester?
Present. The next item on the agenda, item 4, is oral communications from the public. Oh, sorry, I skipped an item. Trying to catch up on time, I guess. Item 3, approval of minutes. The minutes for the February 2nd, 2023 regular meeting have been delivered to commission members and copies have been posted on the City Hall bulletin board. If there are no corrections or additions, a motion is in order to approve these minutes.
I have motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor? Raise your hand. And that looked unanimous. Item 4, oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the commission from acting on non-agenda items. If you would like to speak on this item, please submit a blue speaker card to the staff now. Would any member of the public like to comment on this item?
Are there any public comment cards for item number 4?
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5, unfinished business. Item 5.1, Bystander Intervention Subcommittee update. The Bystander Intervention Subcommittee will present an oral update. No action will be taken on this item. Commissioner Poicon will provide the oral update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone. Our report is we had a very good meeting regarding the bystander training that we're hoping to have on either May 9th, 10th, or 11th. We submitted an application of interest to the Right to Be organization to express our interest in trying to get a training for our community, for the public. And we will also be reaching out to CARE to see if they have any availability for that month as well. So we will be meeting next week to kind of assess where we're at from that point. Thank you.
Do any commissioners have questions? Seeing none, would any member of the public like to provide comment on this item? If so, please submit a blue speaker card. Seeing no public comment on this item, I'll move on to item 5.2, the Housing Insecurity Subcommittee. The Housing Insecurity Subcommittee will present an oral update. No action will be taken on this item. Commissioner Javier Webb will provide an oral update.
Thank you. So we are moving forward with our plans for the event. We've got some more structure around it, meaning we have our timings down. So the event's going to be approximately 2 hours from start to finish. Some of the other things that we've worked on we had some discussions on who our partners are going to be, outside tabling some resources for us. And we also have our questions ready for our speakers. We haven't determined who the speakers are going to be yet. That's the next step in our process, or we're going to continue out with that process. But a lot of it, we gathered a lot of the timings, the agenda, how things are going to flow. So it's forming up really well right now. So we have our date, our times, our locations. The only thing missing now are the speakers that are going to be willing to speak, because it's a very sensitive subject for people that are unhoused or one paycheck away to come up and speak publicly about their situation. So we're going to keep scouring and talking to our partners to see if we can get some people out there. Otherwise, the rest of our community is going to be able to speak out and share in this wonderful experience. It's going to be a great, great event.
I'll add that the event is already generating some public interest and buzz, so very excited about that. We are looking forward to really daylighting some of the issues, the very broad set of issues around housing insecurity in our community. Do any of the commissioners have questions on this item? Seeing none, would any member of the public like to provide comment on this item? Do we have any speaker cards for this item? Moving on to item 5.3, the Mental Health Subcommittee. The Mental Health Subcommittee will present an oral update. No action will be taken on this item. Vice Chair Wokidu will provide the oral update.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. We had a meeting, and this time we were able to move forward to begin to form a structure around it. We were able to discuss event date, which will be somewhere around June, and that will be based on the availability of our partners. And we're also able to discuss event time, which will be around about 2 hours as well, and a venue. We're still trying to work that out because we're considering also parking spaces. And we were able to make communication with one of our partners that we would probably likely play a major role, and have had some conversations, which we're still trying to iron out how all that will play out. And we also were talking about some of the expectations in terms of the attendees and but focusing on what our goals are. We kept those in the forefront, understanding and recognizing the issues of mental health, and also, empathy through community connections. And we're still looking to have a practical aspect during our event as well. And so we also have a partner that we've been engaging in conversation on that. And the third goal is to have some referral materials available so people can have a takeaway and after the event. And so that's basically what we're doing, and we're just happy that we were able to make some breaking ground on our last meeting, and we'll continue to work on that. So looking forward to a great event as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any of our commissioners have questions or comments? Seeing none, would any member of the public like to provide comment on this item? I see that no cards have been submitted. Moving on to item 6, new business. Item 6.1 is Federal Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership funding recommendations for the fiscal year 2023-2024 Annual Action Plan. The Human Relations Commission will hold a public hearing to hear funding recommendations for the fiscal year 2023-24 Annual Action Plan and make funding recommendations for City Council consideration. Action will be taken on this item. Housing Specialist Harsha Ramchandani will present this item. Assistant Community Developer Director Wayne Chen is available virtually to answer questions. We will now see the staff's presentation. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Harsha Ramchandani, and I'm a housing specialist. I'm also here. Joining us tonight is Wayne Chen, Assistant Community Development Director, via Zoom today. We're pleased to be with you this evening to discuss funding recommendations for public service activities and capital projects. Staff will be presenting a brief overview of the fiscal year 2023-2024 Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA program, the evaluation framework presented to the HRC in November 2022, and the following funding recommendations for the HRC to approve and forward to the City Council. Public service activities as part of the annual NOFA process for Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and general funds, which include one-time American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funding, which is only available for fiscal year 2023 through 2024, and eligible capital projects. The City of Mountain View is an entitlement jurisdiction which enables the city to receive annual grants on a formula basis for the CDBG and home programs directly from HUD. The amount of program funds that are awarded each fiscal year fluctuate and are dependent on the federal budget adopted for these programs. To receive the annual grant, the city must develop and submit to HUD a 5-year consolidated plan. This is a comprehensive planning document that outlines the city's priority goals for a 5-year period and how CDBG and home funding would be used to achieve those goals. Shown on screen are the 6 priority goals in the city's fiscal year 2020 through 2025 consolidated plan. In addition, the city must also submit annual action plans, which include a summary of the activities and projects that will be funded in the upcoming fiscal year, identifying how the annual grants as well as available funds will be invested in public services and capital projects to meet the priority goals of the consolidated plan. The funding sources for public service activities include a maximum of 15% of available CDBG funds, which for fiscal year 2023 through 24 is approximately $131,500. The city, in addition, makes an annual appropriation from the general fund to supplement CDBG funds and support programs not eligible for federal funds. The allocation is $171,000, supplemented by one-time ARPA funding of $95,540. ARPA funding was appropriated by Council for nonprofit funding in the current fiscal year. Awarded applicants would be allocated only for fiscal year 2023 through 24, with conditional funding for fiscal year 2024 through 25, subject to satisfactory performance in the first fiscal year. The funding threshold that was approved by the HRC was a minimum grant of $7,500 for CDBG and general fund applications. The funding cycle for public service activities is a 2-year funding cycle, and the upcoming fiscal year would be the first year of funding. Year 2 funding for CDBG and general funds is estimated to be similar to year 1. Funding sources for capital project activities in CDBG funds include $30,000 for a minor home repair program and approximately $751,000 for direct allocation. There are approximately $1.4 million in home funds for direct allocation. Capital project recommendations include a direct allocation of available CDBG and home funds for the rehabilitation of the Crestview Hotel, and CDBG funding for a minor home repair program to Rebuilding Together Peninsula. The funding cycle for capital projects is only for 1 year and the upcoming fiscal year of fiscal year 2023 through 24. The Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, was issued on December 5th, 2022 with a deadline of January 17th, 2023, for public service and capital projects. Outreach for the NOFA included emails sent to interest lists, sharing an overview with community-based organizations that attend a monthly call organized by the Human Services Division, publishing a public notice in print in the Palo Alto Daily Post and digitally in the Mountain View Voice. The public notices were also posted on the city website in English and the city's multicultural engagement program languages of Spanish, Mandarin, and Russian. A pre-application webinar was also held on December 16, 2022. Shown on screen is a summary of the applications received for each of the noticed activities. In November, the HRC approved a direct allocation of home funding for capital projects to affordable housing projects in the city's pipeline that are shovel-ready to meet program requirements, which is why home funds were not included in the SNOFA. HUD allows entitlement jurisdictions to directly allocate funding to projects that align with the city's consolidated plan goals and that meet national CDBG and home objectives. In addition, the HRC approved a minimum funding threshold of $300,000 for CDBG funding for capital projects. In the past, capital funding has been used for affordable housing developments, renovations of nonprofit buildings, and public works projects such as new parks or sidewalk improvements. However, no applications were received in this NOFA. This could be due to a number of reasons, such as a lack of nonprofits interested in receiving federal funding for capital projects, as the city's funding allocation is relatively small for capital projects which typically have much greater funding needs due to the size and cost of such projects. In addition, the federal funds have various program and reporting requirements that may be challenging for recipients to administer. As approved by the HRC in November, in case of no or ineligible applications, the CDBG funds available for capital projects are recommended for direct allocation to the city's affordable housing projects pipeline. Each application was reviewed and scored based on the evaluation criteria presented to the HRC in November 2022, which included completeness of application and scoring awarded for furthering of consolidated plan goals, addressing community needs, and administrative capacity to implement the program, activity, or project, and having processes in place, including monitoring and reporting. Both the CDBG and General Fund public service applications were oversubscribed, and all eligible programs scored highly. Funding recommendations have been made, taking into consideration the following factors shown on screen. Ten applications were received for CDBG public services. The funding requests were for $343,669, and funding available is approximately $131,000. To address the oversubscription, Project Sentinel is recommended for funding through general housing funds instead of CDBG funding. This aligns with past practice of the Project Sentinel program being funded through housing funds. The Day Worker Center's Education Skills Training and Job Placement Program is also recommended to receive funding from the General Fund along with other General Fund sub-recipients. This would enable the Day Worker Center to streamline their monitoring and reporting processes for both activities per the compliance requirements for the General Fund. In addition, WeCare is not recommended as it was deemed ineligible as a public service activity. WeCare is a for-profit organization that has applied for CDBG public services for a program that provides technical assistance to small daycare businesses. CDBG funds can be provided under the economic development category to an agency that gives technical assistance to micro-enterprise businesses, which are defined as a business with 5 or fewer employees, including the owner, and provided the business owner is low to moderate income. However, as the city's funding allocation is relatively small and based on community needs, it has been typically focused towards public service and eligible capital projects. If City Council provides direction to pursue funding of economic development projects in addition to public service and capital projects, staff will have to create a policy and procedures manual which must be approved by HUD before economic development projects can be funded. Given the city's NOFA of CDBG funds was for public services and capital projects and not economic development, it has been determined that the city will be unable to fund WeCare's Boost program. Including the alternate funding recommendations for these three applicants, the CDBG funds are still oversubscribed by about 45,000. Based on the funding available, staff recommends consistent proportional funding of 74% of all funding requests for the 7 remaining programs. This funding percentage allows for available funds to be distributed equally among all recommended applicants for the 2-year grant cycle. All the programs and activities meet community needs and would benefit low and moderate income households. Next, we have the public service funding recommendations for the general fund. All the organizations that applied for the general fund appropriation provide needed and valuable services to low-income seniors, disabled persons, youth, and families. Funding public service activities provide a variety of unique services for low-income and at-risk populations and enables the city to further the priority goals identified in the Federal Consolidated Plan. Without general fund support, agencies which would not be eligible for CDBG funds would not receive city funding. As the requested amount is more than the available funding of the general fund allocation and the supplemental ARPA funds for fiscal year 2023 through 24, taking into account the evaluation factors noted previously, staff recommends proportional funding to maintain consistent funding for the recommended applicants over the 2-year grant period. All programs and activities, including the Day Worker Center's Education, Skills Training, and Job Placement Program, which is recommended to be transferred from the CDBG list of applicants, are recommended for funding at 78% of their requested amounts. This funding percentage allows for available funds to be distributed proportionately and consistently among all recommended applicants. Capital funding recommendations include an allocation of 30,000 of CDBG funds for implementing a minor home repair program. The city received 1 application from Rebuilding Together Peninsula for their Safe at Home program. The organization had been a CDBG subrecipient when this program was previously funded through public service grants until 2019. The program was paused during the COVID-19 pandemic, and based on community feedback, there remains a need for these services. The goal of the home repair programs is to address minor home repair needs for eligible low-income homeowners before they become serious safety or deferred maintenance issues. Examples of common repairs are shown on screen. For the CDBG and home capital projects funding, it is recommended that the combined funding of approximately 2.2 million is allocated for rehabilitation of the Crestview Hotel project. Over the last 2 years, the city has set aside approximately 5.3 million in CDBG and home funds for the rehabilitation and conversion of the Crestview Hotel for permanent affordable housing. The 48 units City staff has been working with the county and the selected developer to advance the project. The project has also been awarded important funding from the state's Project Homekey program. However, due to the rising costs of construction, there is a remaining funding gap that must be closed before renovations can begin. The county remains in high support of this project, and staff is actively evaluating funding options and working with the city to close the gap. Staff recommends that the 2.2 million is allocated to the Crestview Hotel project to help meet this funding gap. This would allow the project to move forward and provide much needed 48 affordable housing units and to meet Project Homekey deadlines. If the actual CDBG or home funding for fiscal year 2023 through 24 differs from the estimated amount, The amount allocated to the Crestview Hotel project would be adjusted accordingly. This brings us to the next steps. City staff will include HRC recommendations in the staff report for the City Council public hearing, currently scheduled for April 25th, during which Council will make the final funding decisions. The City Council's funding decisions will then be incorporated into the fiscal year 2023-24 annual action plan. The draft annual action plan with the recommendations will be published for a 30-day public comment period on March 24th, 2023. The final annual action plan will be submitted to HUD on May 15th, and the program year for public service activities begins on July 1, 2023. In closing, this brings us to the end of the presentation and the recommendations to be included in the fiscal year 2023 through 2024 annual action plan. Wayne and myself are now available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harsha. Before we begin discussion on these items, the consideration of funding recommendations for the Community Services Agency requires a member of the Commission to recuse themselves due to conflict of interest. Staff will explain how the Commission discussion and deliberations on this item will proceed.
Thank you, Chair Sylvester. First, the Commissioner will make a statement of recusal and leave the room for discussion, specifically of the items for which there's a conflict of interest, which again is the funding recommendation for the Community Services Agency. Then the commissioners will have the opportunity to ask questions specifically about the funding recommendations for the Community Services Agency, of which there are 3. Followed by that opportunity to ask questions, the chair will open a public hearing. Any commenters who came specifically to comment on the Community Service Agency funding recommendations will have the chance to speak, and I recommend checking in with staff now so that we can pull your cards and have them ready. Thank you. And following public comment, the commissioners will deliberate and take action only on the CSA funding recommendations, which means if commissioners want to discuss amendments to overall funding that includes changing the CSA funding amounts, that will need to be discussed and deliberated then. It cannot be revisited once the commissioner returns to the room. Once action is taken, the commissioner will be called back to the room and the commission will be able to ask questions, the public will be able to comment, and the commission will deliberate and take action on the balance of the recommendations from staff for the CDBG Public Services and Capital Projects funding for fiscal year 23 through 24. Before we move on, are there any questions from the commission on this process? Thank you.
Can the commissioner with a conflict of interest please make your recusal statement?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Baird, and I'm recusing myself from discussion of the Community Services Agency funding recommendation, from the Community Services Agency funding recommendations due to my position on the board of Community Services Agency. I have not participated and will not be participating in the recommendation to Council regarding CSA funding in any way. Thanks.
Thank you. The Commission will now proceed with the discussion of the Community Services Agency funding recommendations. As noted, all other funding recommendations will be discussed when Commissioner Baird returns. Do any members of the Commission have questions on the Community Services Agency funding recommendations?
I did. Thank you, staff and everyone really who put in the work for all this. One of my questions is, how did y'all come up with the 74% allocation for CSA?
The 74% allocation is based on funding available, and the 74% would apply to all of the eligible applicants for CDBG Public Services, not just Community Services Agency.
Do commissioners have any other questions? I will now open the public hearing on the Community Services Agency funding recommendations. There will be an opportunity to comment on the rest of the funding recommendations when Commissioner Baird returns. Would any member of the public like to comment on this item? If so, please submit a blue speaker card to staff if you have not already. And noting that you would like to speak on this particular recommendation. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. I see CSA Executive Director Tom Myers approaching the podium.
Thank you very much. There we go. Thank you very much, Chair Sylvester and other commissioners, for considering funding for CSA tonight. I'd like to acknowledge the HRC and the fact that the HRC is about to be 30 years old. As someone who used to be on this commission, I consider that to be very important. I'd like to also talk about the importance of CDBG funding. The Emergency Assistance Network, to which CSA belongs, ensures that every single zip code in Santa Clara County is covered with basic safety net services. And CSA is a proud member of the Emergency Assistance Network. And the importance of CDBG and the general fund funding cannot be overstated. It is not the biggest funding that we receive by any means, but it is very important to show our partnership with the city of Mountain View. I also want to talk a little bit about what CDBG funds can be used for. CDBG funds can be used for things that other funding will not allow. As many of you know, funders do not like to fund staffing, and CDBG funds fund directly into staffing, which means that when you are approving these funds, you are approving funding that we can use for our highly professional staff there that we are very proud of. I'd also like to point out that one of our fundings is for senior services and case management, specifically for seniors here in Mountain View. I recently, and it's still ongoing, am dealing with the fact that my mother has been dealing with health issues. And she has a husband, 3 children, 2 sons-in-laws, and various members of our family who can advocate for her. There are a lot of low-income seniors here in Mountain View who don't have that kind of advocacy for them, which makes it really important to have senior case management available, especially in this part of the county where seniors are such a high percentage of the population. So in short, I would say I'm here to answer any questions you may have. CSA is proud to constantly partner with the city of Mountain View, and if you have any further questions, not just tonight, but at any time, please feel free to reach out to either me or to anyone else on the CSA staff. We'll be happy to keep you informed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, for being a resource and for the comments that you made and clarifications. I do have a question for you, so don't go away. You said that the percentage of seniors in North County is higher than the rest of the county. Can you just shed any light on that? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. If you look at census population, you'll find that seniors are a higher percentage of the population in northern Santa Clara County cities, and specifically in CSA service area of Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills. Obviously, these funds are used specifically to serve Mountain View seniors, and that is the highest portion of seniors that we serve because poverty is much stronger and much more prevalent here in Mountain View than it is in a lot of neighboring communities. But I think that that's a trend we've always seen. It's been there in the 20 plus years that I've been at CSA. And frankly, I think that a lot of it has to do with the demographic makeup that we find up here in the northern part of the county.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Do any of my fellow commissioners also have questions for Tom Myers?
I do.
Thank you.
You mentioned that this fund is also used for staffing, that's not used in other places. And Can you provide some specifics as to how this funding helps with your staffing?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of funders do not allow funds to be used for staffing purposes. This money does go directly to support case managers in the instance of senior services as well as homelessness prevention. Those two programs. In the general fund, that funding helps to support our senior lunch program, which, as you know, operates daily out of this Mountain View Senior Center. And that we provide lunch for anywhere from 150 to 200 seniors on a daily basis at the Mountain View Senior Center. Yeah, we over there we have 4 staff, a cook and 2 kitchen aides, as well as a program director.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
Do other commissioners have questions for Tom Myers?
I do. Welcome, Tom. Thank you for being here.
Thanks,
I had a question. So one of the services that I'm not seeing here used to be homeless services through CSA. Is there a reason why it's no longer being provided through CSA, or why it's not being requested?
It's not being requested. That doesn't mean that it's not being provided. CSA has homeless case managers, and in fact, thankfully, after a little while, we are now fully staffed in that department, so we do have homeless case managers. They work in conjunction with the homeless prevention services, but these funds are used specifically for homelessness prevention services. In years past, we used to get a small amount for homeless services specifically. We have found other funding sources to take care of that so that we can concentrate on homelessness prevention here. And you can never double dip. Everyone will tell you, you can't say, okay, we're going to take this funding and oh, wait a minute, we're already paying for that case manager over there. You have to be real careful about that. And some of you may know Marvin in our office and his team are very, very eagle-eyed about making sure that all of that is taken care of. Yeah. But we do have homeless services, and those are very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have questions?
Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
And I know this is a very challenging when you come out to ask for funding. And as you can see, what the city has recommended is going to be a little gap in what you're asking for. Can you tell us what the difference would be with that gap and how you would make up for it?
That's an excellent question. And I think that what that means is that we have to go find other funding. We have to go find other funding, which means we have to go out and fundraise. A big chunk of my time is spent trying to fundraise from individual donors, from foundations, from corporations, and others. So if we have that gap, as any of the agencies do, and these are all worthy agencies, my counterparts here are all worthy agencies, and we're all doing the good work, and there's never enough people engaged in this good work. There never is. But I would say that means that all of us have to go out and get that additional fund. So I think that, it can come from a variety of sources. For instance, we have a program right now where only about half of the staffing is covered by grant funding, which means all the rest of that is covered by fundraising. And I know fundraising sometimes has a dirty connotation, but it's so important. Because when you're an organization like CSA, and people who have been on the CSA staff have heard me say this over and over again, we're not a government entity. We can't go raise taxes to get more revenue. And we are not a corporation. We can't make more widgets to get more revenue. We are completely dependent on the money that is raised to come into that organization. And that is why it is so incredibly important, because if that fundraising doesn't happen through all kinds of pieces that we put together, including this one, then that means we can't provide the services that we provide. Does that answer your question?
In a roundabout way, yeah.
In a long-winded way, I'm sure, too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very good question, because it's very important. Yeah.
I got one more question. So
Sure.
a lot of what happens with service agencies tends to be with staff retention. Of course, the environment now around Santa Clara County is that things are getting more expensive. Do any of these funds ever go into staff increase in salaries?
Right. Every year we participate in the Fair Pay for Nonprofit survey, as well as other surveys. We look at other surveys as well. And our goal, we have a compensation philosophy at CSA, and our goal is to pay people as at least 75 in the above median, and at least somewhere in the 75th to 100th percentile of staffing. That said, nonprofits will never be the highest paid organizations out there, and we all know that. And I frankly, I think that's a shame and a crime. But we do our surveys, and we do make sure that everyone is above median in our salaries. Very important to us to retain people, and especially in this atmosphere where it is so easy to go jump to another organization or another entity or into another line of work. We've seen the same churn that everyone else has seen. There's no question about it. I used to be able to say CSA has been spared a lot of the turnover that other organizations have seen. That's not the case anymore. I can't say that truthfully anymore. We have seen huge amounts of churn just like everybody else. But one nice thing is that churn seems to be stopping. We have seen a stabilization over the last several months, which has been extremely helpful. And I think I'm hopeful that this will take. Well, we're also seeing ourselves getting our services to a more steady pace rather than the chaotic pace that we all dealt with under COVID. So.
Seeing no additional questions, thank you very much.
Right.
Would any other member of the public like to comment on this item? Specific to the CSA, yes. Thank you. I will now close the public hearing and bring the item back for commission deliberation and action, specifically on the Community Services Agency funding recommendations. A motion will be required to take action on this item. I would like to get some advice from Principal Analyst, Management Analyst Laurel James, since this is a little different now that we have a member recused and we're dividing the items up. Do you have guidance on how you would like us to deliberate this separately?
It really is up to the commission if there are further comments that they would like to make on this specific recommendation or share. And then if anyone has a motion to either move the staff recommendation or to move the staff recommendation with an amendment, they can make it now, and the commissioners may take a vote.
Thank you very much. Well, first, do any commissioners have comments on this item specific to Community Services Agency? Would anybody be ready to make a motion on this item?
I'd like to make the motion that we accept the recommendation by city staff on this item and we move forward with it.
I second.
I think we're ready for a vote. Do we take a roll call vote on this or just a show of hands? All members in favor of the motion to accept staff's recommendation on the Community Services Agency funding, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Commissioner Baird may now return to the council chambers. Welcome back. My notes actually say, and Commissioner Baird returns. Cue the dramatic music. The commission will now discuss and act on the remainder of the public services funding and capital projects funding recommendations. Do any members of the commission have questions on the recommendations, excluding the Community Services Agency recommendations? Seeing none, I will open up the public hearing on the rest of the funding recommendations. Would any member of the public like to comment on this item? If so, please submit a blue speaker card to staff if you have not already done so. Each speaker will have 3 minutes.
Mark Fischler is first.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, Mark.
I'm Mark Fischler. I'm the Development Director of Parents Helping Parents. We help families with children with special needs. We've enjoyed, I just looked it up, 20-year relationship with the City of Mountain View. So we're very grateful for the funding that you have supplied to us year over year. We typically help somewhere in the range of 100 to 125 Mountain View families every year, but we don't just help them once. Typically, we're helping these families 3 to 4 times, so we're really providing closer to 400 services a year for these families. What we do is we help the parents of kids with special needs, and that's kids of all ages. So, whether it's a child with autism or learning disability, Down syndrome, whatever the case may be, and we're helping them understand how to work with their child's school with something called an IEP, Individual Education Program. We're showing them how to apply for public benefits they may be eligible for, like in-home support services, which you can get from the county, or SSI, Supplemental Security Income, which you can get from the federal government. So we have mental health workshops on a weekly basis. I should also mention that everything we do in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So matter of fact, more than half of the families we help speak a language other than English. About 80% of the families we help come from communities of color. We also have parent support groups. We have 25 different condition-specific, culturally competent parent support groups, many of which are led by volunteers. And the other thing I should also mention is about 90% of us that work at PHP are parents of a kid with special needs themselves, so it's that lived experience. And so when you come talk to one of our staff, you're talking to somebody who may have not walked the same exact mile in your shoes as a parent, but a very similar mile. So I think the work we do is truly important, it's badly needed. We've been around since 1976, and the need just grows every year. The last thing I'll say in closing, like I said, I'm very grateful for the partnership with the City of Mountain View. I have to admit I was a little disappointed that the amount of funding recommended is actually less than last year, but I know you guys have budgetary issues you're working with, but of course, if there's anything you can do to at least bring us to the level of the current year, I would appreciate it. And I will stop here and, of course, answer any questions that you may have. And again, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any commissioners have questions for Parents Helping Parents? I do have a question for you, actually. Sure. You mentioned the gap from what we're recommending, the staff is recommending this year, to what you have this year. Can you tell us the impact of that delta?
Well, actually, Tom is gone. I mean, I couldn't put it any better than he did, right? I mean, it just means we have to find other sources to do this work. And like Tom said, there are not a lot of funders that want to fund specific, salary work for, so, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the difference between, $7,500 and $6,400 is going to kill PHP. It's $1,100, but every little bit helps, and, our costs are going up every year. So, but again, I understand the budgetary pressures that you guys have too.
Thank you very much for your answer. Do other commissioners have questions?
Yes, I do. I was just wondering, in the past, what are some of the fundraisers that you've encountered or engaged with to close any gaps, if you could?
In this case, it would be individual donations. Matter of fact, we're having our gala on April 28th. You're all invited in Campbell. And yeah, that's typically, from an individual donor standpoint, our biggest fundraiser of the year. And it's really the unrestricted funds that we can use, like most nonprofits, to pay salaries and make up for any gaps that we find from not receiving what we need in the way of grants. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your public comment.
Thank you.
Do any other members of the public in attendance wish to make comment on this item?
Next is Tracy Wingrove.
Hello, good evening. I'm Tracy Wingrove. I'm with the Healthier Kids Foundation. And if you're not familiar with the Healthier Kids Foundation, we provide screening services for physical and mental health screenings here in Silicon Valley, as well as educational programming. Our screening services that we use funds for from Mountain View are specifically our Vision First program, which screens children for vision issues using a camera that can tell, even if they're wearing glasses or not glasses, what their prescription is. And what I like to call our secret sauce is that we have care coordinators that we call parent advocates who follow up with every family whose child screens out of range and helps them get the care the children need. And we follow that family through to the children get the care exactly that they need, no matter what that takes. So whatever barriers they need to overcome, we're helping them overcome. So we're working with underserved families, and we're helping them overcome barriers like getting health insurance, transportation, language barriers. All of our parent advocates are multilingual. As Mark mentioned, we serve a large population of Spanish and Vietnamese speakers, and these folks find it very helpful that we are able to speak their languages. I wanted to share with you a big milestone we just celebrated. We just celebrated helping kids get 10,000 pairs of glasses since our inception. So we're really excited to celebrate the impact that the work makes in the community. And if you'll bear with me, I brought a testimonial from a family who recently had our services. This is a parent of a 5-year-old. When the parent advocate from Healthier Kids Foundation called me, I was very shocked and, to be honest, very emotional. I didn't think my daughter would have any vision issues. I was not expecting these results. So after the screenings, when the kids screen out of range, we first approached families with a phone call. The parent advocate provided resources for an appointment with an optometrist. Then we followed up with them, and she said, after my daughter got her glasses, she was able to see better and is now reading. She's able to see clearly the small print. We previously were only using books with big print because she couldn't read the small print. She says, this parent program's outreach and follow-up are so important. Families like mine don't know about the services and resources that are out there to get access for their child when he or she is in need. We don't feel comfortable with the programs because we don't know what they offer and we don't speak the language. The outreach that Healthier Kids does is very important, and we encourage all funders to support these types of programs. My daughter can see better and clearly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that. Do any commissioner members have questions?
Yes, I have a question, and thank you for your public comment. I was wondering, for the families that use your services, are they primarily getting referred to you through the public school system, or do you also work with other organizations or private schools, or just where are they mostly getting referred from?
Sure. So we actually we have some contracts with actual whole school districts where we go and screen the entire schools. But we also work with preschools, daycare centers, charter schools, and here in Mountain View, I've actually been on site visits where we've been at all the state preschools and done the screenings there. So in Mountain View, we are screening about 315 children.
Per year, or?
Per year. Because we're not doing the whole, Mountain View Wisdom School District. We're mostly focused on daycares, child centers, charter or non-public schools, and the preschools.
Thank you.
Quick question. Are you just looking for vision issues, or are you also screening for healthy eyes, like other issues with vision or eye issues?
The camera that we use is really looking for vision issues like myopia, astigmatism. But when the camera notices any issues, it comes up in a report, and that's when we refer to an optometrist.
Thank you.
I have a question. What percentage of kids with vision issues, do you have an estimate of what percentage of kids with vision issues don't get care, don't get correction?
So I can share with you that pre-pandemic, we typically saw consistently 13% to 14% of kids screening out of range. Since the pandemic, it's gone up to 19%, which is actually, doesn't seem like that much between the percentage, but it's a large increase in terms of the number of kids who are needing additional care. Of those kids, the ones that we were able to specifically get treatment for, it runs about 68%, typically. And that's to do for a lot of reasons. You know, there are parents who, you know, once we notify them of the issue, they're able to go out on their own and get treatment for their kids. They don't necessarily need our follow-up.
Thank you. That's a really dramatic increase.
Mm-hmm.
Do any other commissioners have questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Next card is from Melissa Luke.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Luke, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuilding Together Peninsula, and I just wanted to thank you for consideration of our proposal this evening to return to Mountain View to provide free safety and health-related repairs for the residents. We anticipate assisting the city to address the consolidated plan, specifically related, of course, to housing and to infrastructure and physical infrastructure, and to the possibility of partnering with you once again to preserve affordable home ownership and maintain the diverse fabric of the community. We've been doing this for over 30 years and pride ourselves in actually using the repairs as a way to provide not just safety and health, but hope and dignity as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your public comment. For eligible homeowners, does that include mobile homeowners?
It sure does, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does it include people who reside in vehicles?
Actually, that probably would not be an area that we would address, mostly because we are focused on home ownership. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, I see one.
Going back to the mobile home RVs, what type of repairs would you consider, or are there any that are outside your area of expertise?
Well, we currently actually have a project that is partially funded through the Silicon Valley Community Foundation in collaboration with the County of San Mateo that's very similar. And we've been doing that for about a year. There were code violations there, so we've been focused on the ones that are the highest safety concerns. But there really aren't any that we couldn't handle, at least in terms of subbing them out if our in-house senior technicians couldn't deal with them. The real challenge is finding the folks that can provide the materials specifically tailored for mobile homes, but we are making some headway there too.
If I may, I have a quick clarifying question for Housing Specialist Ramchandani. Specific to the CDBG and home funding, are there restrictions on what that funding can be used for in terms of minor home repairs?
Thank you. At this point, based on our knowledge, the minor home repair program, eligible activities would be single homes and mobile homes. We do not have any indication that recreational vehicles would be eligible for the minor home repair program, but we can confirm and get back to the commissioners.
Correct, and that's HUD regulations that you would be confirming? Thank you.
Right, yes, those are HUD regulations.
Question about the services. Is part of the services that you offer if someone needs to be temporarily displaced from their home during repairs, or if, during the process of evaluating the repairs needed, it's found that, we really, it's not going to be feasible to make these repairs. Do you interact with their safety net organizations to try and do a warm handoff for that client, or is that something you provide in-house?
That's a really good question. We have not encountered that so far, but that's not to say that it couldn't arise. So I would not be being honest if I said that we do it currently, because we haven't run into it, but we'd be very open, and we do referrals all the time to other social safety net services for sure. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. My question is there a general requirement, let's say in salary, for them to qualify for your agency services?
Yes, we use the HUD regulations, and all of our service network, those that we provide services to, are either extremely low or very low income.
Thank you very much.
I have
sorry.
one more question.
Get speedier next time.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking over here, okay. So it doesn't seem like you're like a typical organization that does a lot of fundraising, like outside, like the big galas and things like that.
Oh, yes, we do.
You do. You do.
Well, we have, I'm sorry, let me let you finish your question.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, how would you obtain additional funding? Because, again, our staff has recommended like a 20% shortcoming from what we're recommending. And how would you get that funding? And if you're not able to get that funding, what would the impact be for, say, homeowners that are in single families versus homeowners in the RVs? How would you determine which type would not be able to get the funding or get the assistance?
Well, primarily our screening process for applications first requires that they be income eligible. So average household income last year for our services was $40,000. Many of them were below that. And we'll prioritize those that have not had services in the last 5 years. So first time folks, or at least those who haven't had recent services. And then we'll prioritize those that are of highest concern in terms of safety and health. So in terms of triaging, that's part of your question, I think. And then the other part in terms of how we fundraise, we're very typical to many of the colleagues that you've heard from this evening. We have a multi-tiered approach to trying to bring in the funds that we need to do the services. We have a robust we have a grant writer that helps us with the grants for foundations, as well as we do outreach to major donors and other donors, appeals regularly, annually. We do have a major event every year that we rely on for a great deal of our flexible dollars that you've heard talked about, which is gold to those of us in the nonprofits, that we can then apply across the other programs where there's a shortcoming.
Commissioner, if I may make a clarifying comment, the minor home repair program is a capital service program, and they are being recommended for the full allocation of $30,000. The funding recommendations of proportional funding were for public service activities.
Thank you for that.
Does that answer your question?
That was great. Thank you so much.
Sure. You bet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do any other members of the public wish to speak on this item?
The next card is from Teresa Johnson.
Good evening, members of the commission and staff. My name is Teresa Johnson, and I'm the director of Meals on Wheels for the Health Trust. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening, and thank you for your past support. Our program, since the beginning of COVID in 2020, has tripled the number of clients that we serve, as well as the number of meals. We'll be serving 350,000 meals this year to homebound low-income seniors in Santa Clara County. We lost over $1.5 million in funding this year in COVID funding. We expect to lose the last little bit we have next year. So, your support is very important to us to help us be able to continue to serve our Mountain View seniors. Last year, we served almost 70 clients, seniors in Mountain View, and we provided almost 12,000 home-delivered meals for those clients. We're very grateful to the staff for the recommendation for funding, which will really help us provide over 5,000 meals in your community for homebound seniors to approximately 30 clients. These are seniors who are not able to access food in other places. They don't go to food baskets or food shelters. They don't have a way to get to congregate meal services. So it's a service that's really for those who are most at need and homebound. Your contributions are critical to us because we'll help leverage your funding for fundraising. We aren't spending any of your grant on staff or overhead. It will go directly to the cost of meals, and we will fundraise for the other funding that we need to provide those services. We do provide more than a meal. We have a senior socialization program. We can do home visits and phone calls to our clients. We do wellness checks. We are often calling caregivers and things to report issues. I want to end with telling you a little bit about one of your clients in Mountain View. Her name is Sharon, and she's 82 years old. She does live alone, and she suffers from neuropathy. I don't know what the first word is. And she cannot really shop or buy meals as other people are able to do. She does use a walker to get around. Due to her health issues, her low income, and her lack of social support, family and friends, she was really eating a minimal amount of food, and she did not have access to fresh vegetables and fruits very often. And she says that she's extremely grateful for the Meals on Wheels program. Your food is always very The client also reports that they have cardiovascular heart issues, so our low sodium, heart healthy diet is something that really keeps her healthy as she continues to battle her illnesses. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the commission?
Thank you. You mentioned the organization lost $1.5 million in COVID funding this year. Could you please clarify, was that funding that was temporary as a result of, emergency declarations, or just what happened there?
I think your city is probably familiar with some of those sources of funding. There was lots of sources of funding that came down either from local government, came down from the federal government through the state government. We had numerous sources for those funding. For example, excuse me, this year we're receiving $700,000 from the city of San Jose that was earmarked directly for COVID support. We will lose that funding completely next year. Most of the funding we lost this year were federal pass-through dollars that either came from the Older Americans Act or other local governments and the county that no longer had the funds. For example, last year, the county gave us $150,000, which we did not get this year.
Thank you. I had a question, and thank you for all the services that you provide.
No problem.
My question is more about, so y'all provide this service regionally, about what percentage of the people you serve are particularly of Mountain View? You have that number?
What percentage? Darn it, I'm always so prepared. I can't give you a percentage off the top of my head because I'm super bad at math. But I can tell you we did serve 12,000 meals in your community last year to homebound seniors. We have a very strict screening process. Not only do we ask for their income, and we put the extremely low and the very low clients on our grants. But we also do a health assessment. So there's 3 different assessments that we use to determine their level of need. So the higher the scores they have on the 3 different assessments, it puts them higher on the list to get services. I will say that in the 11 years I've been with the Health Trust, I have never turned away an applicant. We have been extremely fortunate. We have support from throughout the county, local government, state government, individual donors, the same type of fundraising that everyone else has spoke about. And we have made it our mission, particularly since the beginning of COVID, to make sure that nobody is turned away for services. When we run out of money, my boss is frequently out there on the phone calling people and asking for more. Hey, we need another $150,000 to make it through this time. So we're really proud of the service that we provide. Our seniors are so fragile. More than 50% of them live alone, and you would not believe how many people have nobody to take care of them. And we have seniors that are living on $950 a month. Now, we all know that's like almost impossible. And so they do not have the funds that they need to get the nutrition. Sorry, I get kind of emotional when I talk about our clients.
Thank you for sharing. It's totally okay to be emotional here. We understand this is really hard work. I'm curious, with inflation, how much your meal costs have gone up.
You don't even want to know.
I was afraid to say
right
that.
Now, I have 3 vendors. We started a vegetarian meal menu, an Asian fusion menu, and an American menu. Our American menu has gone up $2.25 per meal in the last 2 years. And our vendor actually gave me copies of their invoices showing chicken up 121%, and on and on and on. Our vendor costs for the majority of the meals we provide is $8. It costs us about another $3 per meal to do the home delivery service. We do utilize volunteers, but we can't run an entire volunteer program to deliver 350,000 meals. So our costs have gone up significantly. My vendors have already told me that they're going to increase their costs next year, and we're negotiating.
Thank you.
I see a huge gap here. Costs are going up, funding is going away. Who's going to suffer the most?
Our most vulnerable community members, be it the homeless, the elderly, the low income. I will say the COVID, in my mind, the COVID pandemic was a blessing in disguise, because what our community saw were hundreds of nonprofits that came together to provide service, whatever was needed. If I couldn't serve a family, I would call another nonprofit and they'd say, no, I'll take them. So I think in our community, we have so much money, and there are so many great nonprofits that we will continue to provide that gap that's not provided by different levels of government. Is it going to be easy? No, it's never easy to raise money like that. But we're a hardy group, us nonprofits.
Cost control. And I see this in the food industry, where there's a lot of waste going on with, especially with seniors. We provide them with all these great meals. They eat less and less. Are you monitoring this, or?
So we do. One of the things that our drivers are trained to do, for some of our clients, they actually go in the house, put the food in the refrigerator for the clients because it's easier for them. If they see additional meals, they report that back to us. If the client mentions that they haven't eaten yesterday's meal, our driver will call and make a report to us. We'll get on the phone with the client or their caregiver if there's one available, or an emergency contact, and we have the ability to moderate the number of meals that they get. For example, most people get 7 meals a week, 1 meal a day. We can provide 2 meals a day. I had a woman the other day that was crying on the phone because she's eating crackers and peanut butter for dinner, so I give her 2 meals a day. We can do that. I had another lady call me and she's getting cancer treatment and she's sick and she doesn't want to eat as much. So we've dropped her meals to 5 meals a week. Do we hit everybody? Probably not, but we do have a lot of eyes and ears in the community so that we can get the feedback from those clients. We also check in and do annual assessments. We'll talk to the caregivers, we'll talk to their emergency contact, talk to the client. Are you eating the food? Are you having problems with it? They'll usually report to us though. They'll say, I'm getting too much food, or can you stop my meals for a couple of days if they've built some up. Our meals are all prepared by chefs. So our Meals on Wheels are not just a bag lunch with a ham sandwich in it and some cookies. We do not provide dessert. We provide a fresh fruit every day. We provide low-fat milk or juice, and the meals are prepared by chefs according to older American Act standards for nutrition and size.
I think you kind of answered the question I had about the quality of the meals you prepared. I was just concerned about that, but I just want to just commend you for what you do.
Thank you, and our meals are delicious. I was ill for 3 months during the pandemic, and our vendor delivered some food to my house, and I had to fight my kids off to keep them to myself out of the freezer. We do take a great deal of pride in our food. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing so much. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers or public comment on this item?
The next card is from Melissa Lukin.
This has happened many times in the past. No worries. All right. Good evening. Thank you to the City of Mountain View and the Human Relations Commission for your support in the past and for your consideration tonight. My name is Melissa Luke, and I am the Chief Program Officer, Healing and Justice for YWCA Silicon Valley. YWCA is proud to provide residents of the City of Mountain View with a continuum of free and confidential domestic violence services. This includes a 24-hour hotline in English and Spanish, case management, counseling, crisis response, restraining order assistance, therapy and support groups for women and children, adults and children, emergency shelter and long-term housing, medical advocacy, prevention services, and other vital resources. Our 24-hour crisis line support includes safety planning, crisis counseling, and information and referrals. Services are high engagement and time-intensive, requiring a high level of 24/7 staffing. We provide these services in the community, literally meeting survivors where they are at, physically and emotionally. All services are survivor-centered, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed. YWCA has provided services to the City of Mountain View since the 1970s, when we were the support network for battered women. We also have a relationship with Mountain View Police Department, where officers can directly connect survivors of domestic violence with our team. Through that particular partnership, we respond to their domestic violence reports and reach out to offer services to survivors in need. Unfortunately, we continue to see the importance of these services in Mountain View and throughout our communities. Domestic violence is a root cause of homelessness. 80% of all homeless women and children are homeless as a result of domestic violence. 46% of women report staying in an abusive relationship because they have nowhere else to go. Since the pandemic began, YWCA has seen a 295% countywide increase in survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault seeking support, and a 26% increase in calls to our 24-hour crisis line. That's an increase from 900 to over 3,500 survivors every year, and from 4,800 to over 6,000 calls every year. Our general fund proposal respectfully requests $42,500 to provide 50 Mountain View residents with essential domestic violence services. That includes case management and legal services. This is a 25% increase from this year's contracted goal of 40 residents, reflecting increased demand for services from your residents. In the first 6 months of this fiscal year, we have already served 37 residents, meeting 93% of our annual goal in 6 months. Please know how grateful we are for your recommendation for continued funding. We understand that funds are limited. At the same time, we hope you understand funding is not keeping pace with increased requests. Cuts to funding means cuts to staff, and having fewer staff respond to ever-increasing need is not a sustainable solution to ending violence in our homes. On behalf of our staff, volunteers, and the survivors we serve, thank you so much for your support. Together, we can empower our community to live free of domestic violence. What questions can I answer?
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you so much for the work that you do. You mentioned a good relationship with the Mountain View Police Department. I'm also wondering, do you have a direct relationship with the El Camino Hospital or local healthcare clinics? Sometimes survivors, I imagine, might need care but don't want to involve the authorities, at least, not at that time.
Yeah, definitely. And, our goal is that survivors are able to access the services through any and all doors, right, which includes partnering with the local medical providers. In terms of our partnership with El Camino, it's actually specific to therapy services. So tonight we were asked, talking about the case management and the legal support. Of course, that continuum of care includes therapy. And so we're very, very fortunate that they help fund our therapy services in this area.
A quick question. Could you elaborate more on your restraint services and your legal services that you offer and help?
Yeah, absolutely. So a key consideration, I suppose, is that when someone is leaving an abusive relationship and, especially when they have children, there are so many needs, right? From basic needs, if someone has literally been kicked out of the home, oftentimes survivors are leaving with nothing but the clothes on their back and their kids in tow. And so then that requires the emergency shelter, the food, the clothing, and all of those basic needs and provisions, right? And then from there, so that's the short-term crisis support. And then from there, you're looking at kind of the middle-term support, which is where the case management comes in, because there are so many needs, right? Especially survivors who usually have been isolated. So a major tactic of someone who is doing harm is to completely isolate their survivors so they have no other options for support, right? So they cut off their connections from friends and family and loved ones, make them feel shame, blame, and guilt for seeking support, making them feel like it's their fault, right? If it's an immigrant survivor, they will often threaten, because the children are often born in the U.S., right? They will often threaten that the children will get taken away by the court system or by the police because, the survivor is not a citizen themselves. Immigration documentation gets taken away. Oftentimes, our survivors, they don't even know what their immigration status is. That's another reason they're not going to seek help. There are just so many considerations, right? So we've talked about immigration. We've talked about basic needs. The isolation often means that folks do not have a job, or even if they have a job, the income gets put into the account of the person doing harm, so they have no access to funds. Again, if they do not speak English as a first language, the isolation will be you can't go to ESL classes, right? So how are you able to get a self-sustaining job if you can't speak English? I mean, it's just on and on and on. We have not even talked about the physical impacts of physical abuse. We have not talked about the emotional impacts to survivors and to those kids that are witnessing the abuse, right? So there's just such a wide spectrum of need. That's where the case management comes in. The case managers do a needs assessment, looking at all of those different, domains of need and support, and then go from there, right? Everything is by survivor choice. So if they choose to stay with us long term, which many do, then we'll continue working with their case. Immigration cases can take years, right? Visas can take years to figure out. Court cases can take years to figure out. If you're looking at a divorce or child custody issues, that's until the kid is 18, right? And it's especially contentious because of those abuse tactics. So, it really is a wide range of support that we're trying to offer and really build that support system and safety net for survivors.
Thank you so much for what you do, Melissa. So it's very apparent that during pandemic and even post-pandemic, we've seen a rise in DV cases and even survival rates. Can you talk a little bit more about the financial hit your organization has taken because of the rise in DV cases, as well as the limited service you're able to provide to these survivors?
Yeah, definitely. So I think your question is especially meaningful this year. So that this request is for next fiscal year, right? Starting July 1. And we are unfortunately in a situation where, so my department alone, let's say we have a $5.5 million budget, half of it is funded by the county. That entire amount is going out for bid. It's not just us, actually. It's the entire gender-based violence funding countywide, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking for 5 agencies, ACCI, Community Solutions, Next Door, Support Network for Battered Women, Maitri, and us, YWC Golden Gate Silicon Valley. Specific to the YW, that means half of our funding for domestic violence services is on the line. So to be honest, it's a little bit of a scary time. The way I see it is that our funding is kind of like built of bricks, so kind of like a brick wall, right? So if we have 30 contracts for my department alone, this is one of those contracts. Each contract is a brick, right? And so those bricks are stabilizing and allow us to provide that support. As the bricks fall, right? As bricks maybe like they maybe shatter a little bit, we get little cuts here and there, maybe we'll be okay, right? But every little bit that comes out of each of those bricks is an issue, and then next year, half of our bricks may fall.
I know that you've been addressing what's been going on in Mountain View. Do you have a lot of correlation between other towns and support systems between? Because I know that people are not always within city limits. They move, they adjust. And do you have the outside connections and support beyond Mountain View?
Definitely. So our services are countywide. And you know, this proposal again is specific to domestic violence. I very much talked about that tonight. We are one of 5 domestic violence agencies in the county. So we work very closely with our partner agencies. Everyone kind of covers a different area. Historically, YW has supported North County, right? For folks who've been in the area for a long time, Support Network for Battered Women has had, you know, we had 40 years of a relationship before they merged with the YWCA. So we have a strong history and a strong network in this area in particular. For sexual assault services, we are one of only 2 providers in the entire county. So the partnerships there look a little bit different because we are covering from essentially South San Jose all the way up to Palo Alto. But that said, kind of within those jurisdictions, you know, we've been around for so long, we have all of those different connections with law enforcement, with hospitals, with so on and so forth. Absolutely. And yeah, people move, they have to move because there's no housing to find. And again, especially if you're a survivor. So when you're a survivor, of course, there's the piece around not having enough money because you were so isolated you weren't allowed to make money, right? There's the piece around childcare. How do you make money if you have to take care of your kids and you're single parenting for the first time because you chose to leave that abusive relationship? So that's a barrier. We've talked about the language barrier, right? If someone is an immigrant or doesn't speak English as a first language. And then there's additional barrier around kind of safety considerations. So not wanting to live near where the person doing harm is currently living, right? Or near where the workplaces are, or other people who may be contributing to the violence. So that's another additional factor for this particular population, right? They're trying to keep that safety, kind of that safety zone, which impacts where they move.
One more. Do you guys have a physical location? Because I know a lot of other services have gone almost entirely phone and very limited in physical abilities to visit offices or get services directly.
Yeah, definitely. So we do both, in-person and virtual. We provide what's called mobile advocacy. So when I talked about kind of meeting the survivors, right, literally and emotionally. So our main office is in San Jose. We're hoping to open a satellite office soon in North County. That's, you know, pending permitting and other issues. We used to have a presence in Sunnyvale, actually. So we were very, very close to here. And then what our advocates do is we actually go to the survivor. If the survivor can't come to us, we go to them. And realistically, that's going to happen all the time, again, because of the isolation, no access to cars, limited public transportation, you know, so many parents who, again, are single parenting kids under the age of 5, and, you know, it's not feasible to ask them to take their kids on the bus and come see us, right? And So, we'll go see them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do any other members of public fill out a card?
Yes, Sharon Hudson.
Hi, I'm Sharon Hudson, and I'm with Vista Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And I would like to thank you all for your continued support. Vista Center works with people who are losing their vision or have lost their vision. We work with all ages. Our youngest client is 3, our oldest is 106. So we have a wide range of people that we serve. Most of our clients are elderly, as vision loss is predominantly age-related through macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and other diseases that affect us as we age. Vista Center works with the clients to regain their independence, hopefully return them to working into the society, because vision loss typically leads to depression and isolation and cutting themselves off really from family and friends, or feeling like they're cut off from family and friends because they don't have the independence. They can't jump in their car anymore like they used to, go to the store, go to work. So they're feeling much more isolated, and they feel like they don't want to be a burden to their families and friends, so they isolate themselves. They don't call their friends as much, or they feel like their friends would feel like they're a burden. So again, they isolate themselves. We teach, we go in, we do a psychosocial assessment. We make sure that we understand what their vision loss is, any health issues. We connect them with services in the community. Some of them, the services here, and others that are vision loss related. We provide daily living skills training, which is teaching people to be able to do their cooking, cleaning, all the things that they do in their home safely, medication management, accessibility to their technology. Most of us live on our phone. Well, if you can't see it, how are you going to make the phone call or even do your banking and other things? So we have accessible technology training. We also teach orientation and mobility, which a lot of people think of as white cane training. We have support groups and other classes to help people feel more connected to the community. And so we work to make sure people feel as independent as they can be. Thank you again for all your service, your support, and any questions.
Do you see the rate of the need for your services going up as our population is aging? And has COVID infection started to cause increases in vision-related problems that you've been able to see?
The number of people who are visually impaired is definitely going up. Actually, by 2030, they're expecting it to go up almost 50%. Because of the aging population, us baby boomers. Some of y'all are too young, but some of us are baby boomers. And so it is going up. COVID actually offered some opportunities that weren't, because our services, we typically go in and work with the person in the home and work with them in their environment, adapting it so that they can make it accessible to them. Whereas with COVID, we were actually able to reach out, doing more things virtually. And we actually have support groups that people now call into and connect with. And we were able to connect people to each other a little more. So we're doing a lot more things virtually. Zoom has made it also another way for us to reach out to people. So it's been a I won't say a blessing, definitely not a blessing, but it really has helped us to be able to serve the community better.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do and your comment. I was wondering, for the services that you provide, sounds like you do a lot of helping folks kind of adapt their lives to the new reality of vision loss. And I'm wondering how much of your services is sort of helping them adapt their environment, and how much is covering potential gaps in financial need for treatment programs? Like, how much is, helping them pay the healthcare costs to treat their conditions versus helping them in the home?
We do not pay for any health things. We're instructors who provide daily living skills training, orientation mobility training. We do have the medical through our low vision clinic to help them with magnification aids and devices that might enhance their remaining vision. And we do help them find sources of funding for that. If they need special lighting, magnification, even a handheld magnifier is $72 to $100 and something for a good magnifier. And some of the devices actually that can make somebody be able to read can be up to $4,000. So most people, and the sad thing is insurance does not cover vision aids. They don't even cover glasses, not for low vision.
Thank you.
How do people, thank you again for this very important service that you provide. I was just wondering, how do you get your clients, and how people are aware of the services you provide?
Most of our referrals are actually from ophthalmologists and optometrists, people that they cannot help. So they send them on to us, they refer them to us, but we also get it from social services, other agencies, family, friends. Now people are using the web more and finding us that way. So it's generally more through word of mouth on the other side.
Real quick, how many people do you plan on serving with the funds that we give you?
45 to 50 in Mountain View. It costs us roughly about $1,010 per person.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was very informative. Do any other members of the public wish to speak on this item?
The next card is from Georgia Basil.
As they're walking up here, I'm still like amazed about the prices right now with the magnifying glass. Jeez.
Good evening. I'm Georgia Basile. I'm the directing attorney of Senior Adults Legal Assistance, SALA. We're a nonprofit law office here in Santa Clara County. We provide free legal services to clients countywide as well as in Mountain View, targeting seniors that are 62 or older and clients that are very low income or at risk of abuse or loss of independence. Last year, 77% of the Mountain View seniors we served were very low income, 51% were 75 or older, and 34% had a disability, making them really highly vulnerable. We provide our services here locally at appointments at Mountain View Senior Center. We've been going there since the mid-1970s, and we were able to reinstate our services there recently. We also provide services by phone for clients that can't leave their homes or clients that have emergencies and they can't get to the senior center. We are a current grantee, and we thank you so very much. Your funding supports the expanded availability of our services here in Mountain View, and we are requesting funding for next year. We address a variety of safety net legal matters impacting our clients' daily lives. For example, we assist with legal problems related to the benefits they rely on for their basic needs, Social Security, SSI, Medicare, and Medi-Cal, and these are legal issues. We don't help them fill out the applications. These are legal issues. We help clients that are worried about eviction, clients needing reasonable accommodations due to a disability, or clients whose housing is otherwise in jeopardy. jeopardy. We actually help clients with very basic legal planning to help them appoint someone to step in and make decisions for them when they can no longer do that. And that is through very basic documents like powers of attorney. And regrettably, we continue to see many clients that are victims of elder abuse, physical and financial, usually by someone living in their homes or someone they know, an adult child, a grandchild, a tenant renting out a room in their home, a caregiver, even their neighbors. And we are a law office, so we provide the full range of legal representation in court for our clients, from getting a temporary restraining order all the way to a final order, and often wraparound services. We can't charge fees for our services. We're funded by the Older Americans Act, so the only way we can support our services are through grants such as yours and from other cities. So your funding really helps us provide the highest level of service possible, and we're very grateful for the funding we are receiving currently. If our funding is reduced in the upcoming year, regrettably, we will be reducing services because we don't have an alternative, because we can't, again, charge fees or do fee-generating cases. So I, again, want to thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and hopefully we will see you next year.
Thank you so much for the services you provide to our most vulnerable communities. My question is more regarding on kind of like the unknowns, like what, so aside from, well, mostly, what is the succession rate of your services for the elderly community, and how will these funds be used to either increase the rate of succession? If that makes sense.
Do you mean success?
Success rate.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Regrettably, our clients are elderly, and they do pass on us many times when we are representing them, which is very distressing for all of us. Basically, we deal with what we're given. We see clients at senior centers. They're not pre-screened. We do a wide variety of services. Some clients have cases that just need advice as to, where to go and how to address their issues. Others have cases that have merit and are very serious and significant that we will pursue. We do a triage, basically, as attorneys to determine, whether we can handle a case or not. We certainly, as attorneys, ethically cannot represent anybody on a frivolous case or take up court time. So it's difficult to say what we see, because it really depends on the needs that are there. But public benefit issues, elder abuse has been on the rise. A lot of clients very concerned about eviction. Many clients needing reasonable accommodations in their housing because they have a disability and they're living in senior housing, and perhaps the management has made a determination that they can't live there independently, and they can if we do the negotiation process through fair housing to perhaps have a caregiver move in or get them a first floor apartment or a parking space closer to their unit. We just do a wide range of issues, and many clients might present with numerous issues. Their Social Security has been denied, or they haven't gotten their payment, and so they're getting evicted. So we're handling that whole issue basically at the same time. Oftentimes it's crisis management. We'd rather do the planning to prevent, problems from occurring, but so much of our service is really safety net and crisis management.
Thank you.
Thank you for the work that you do. You mentioned that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, you mentioned that, of course, the funding challenge that's affecting everybody, and the fact that you are not able to do fee-generating cases. I'm wondering if it's part of your possible realm of services. I don't know if it would make sense, but is there ever a case where somebody comes to you and you're able to refer them to a trusted other legal consultant who might charge them a fee, if it's somebody that you can verify they're able to afford it? I guess I'm wondering, my real question is, are there income checks, and is there ever an event where somebody does not necessarily qualify for your services, for the free services, and you refer them elsewhere?
Sure. Per HUD guidelines, we're 62 or older, our clients are presumed eligible for CDBG. So we can't turn them away regardless of income, but most of our clients I mentioned, 71% were 50% of the medium or lower. Actually, I believe it was 50% were at 30% of the median. We actually are not required to collect income information under the Older Americans Act. In fact, we're prohibited from turning anyone away, as are senior nutrition programs, any entity funded by the Older Americans Act, but we do collect that information. So our clients are primarily low income. We handle issues that are low income oriented. We don't do living trusts, we don't do real estate litigation, we don't do taxes. So that's the other type of triage we do. So we're focusing on low income issues. With respect to referrals, we are a legal aid entity funded by the State Bar of California. We are prohibited by law from referring any cases to any private attorneys. The only referrals we can make is to a State Bar certified lawyer referral service, Santa Clara County Bar Association, Palo Alto Bar Association, or California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. Those are our primary referrals, and they are all State Bar certified lawyer referral services. So the bar is very protective of their programs and of referrals that are made. That said, we do work with other partners, with Bay Area Legal Aid, with the Law Foundation of Santa Clara County, with Asian Law Alliance. In fact, we have several relationships with them through Fair Housing Consortium and housing consortiums. But I would say one of the agencies we do work really closely with is Community Services Agency. They have an excellent case management program, and we just do the legal work. And so when we need somebody to step in and provide some of those wraparound services, they've just been invaluable here. Oh, and I just realized you were on the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
I have a question from Joan McDonald. Would you like to ask your question?
Last night and today, I restudied the agenda, and more particularly the memorandum from staff, and looked very carefully at the numbers of the asks, the requests, and the recommendations. I didn't bring the text with me, so I'm going on memory. But what I remember, and it may be totally mistaken, was that for one of the funding, there were $278,000 available, and at the other right hand, there was a total of what was recommended, and it was significantly lower. I don't recall specifically what that number is. It might have been a 213,000, but that's probably wrong. Anyway, I recall that in the memorandum, the staff said if the amount that actually happened was lower than expected, proportionately, each agency request would be reduced by a certain amount. My question is, if the amount is more than, and the memorandum said it was in at least one of the funding cases, would the proportions be, would the funds be added proportionately to what was recommended? And I hope the answer is yes. Thank you.
I can respond to that. So the figures that were highlighted were for the general fund public service recommendations. Requests were received for 278,724, and the funding that is recommended at about 78% allocated consistently in proportional funding to all eligible applicants totals to 217,655. This would be a proportional allocation taking into account a general fund allocation that is made annually of 171,000 and the supplemental one-time ARPA funding of 95,540. If the number were to be changed by council for the annual allocation, then the funding would be adjusted proportionately amongst all applicants, as was noted in the memo.
Thank you. Were there any other members of the public who have submitted cards? Well, thank you all. We appreciated very much hearing from you and the chance to ask questions of the important work you do. So I will now close the public hearing and bring the item back for commission deliberation and action on the public services and capital projects funding recommendation, excluding the Community Services Agency recommendation. A motion will be required to take action on this item. So first, do any commissioners have any questions or comments to begin?
I had a question that I was wondering if it was going to come up during public comment, but it didn't. And so I just wanted to ask a quick question of staff regarding, and I believe I'm in the correct section for this, regarding the allocation of funds for the Crestview Hotel project. And the memorandum does a great job talking about what the money would go towards, and it says that it's going to help close the gap towards funding. I'm just wondering, what is the anticipated gap remaining? I mean, like, are we talking that this would get us pretty close, or I guess I'm just wondering, what is the anticipated gap?
I can respond to that. At this time, there is a funding gap of about 11.5 million. And the city is working with the county and the developer to explore funding options to close the gap. The city is bringing funding options for approximately 3.8 million in additional funds to the council on March 14.
Additional funds separate from this, or
the 3.8 would include the 2.2
would include
million in CDBG and home funds.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
If I may also add, this is Wayne Chen, Assistant Community Development Director. As Harsha mentioned, with these additional city funds and with anticipated additional county funding, we anticipate that the remaining funding will be closed. To answer that portion of your question. Thanks.
Thank you, mysterious voice.
Can I dovetail off of that? Yeah, I did have a question about this. I'm sorry, it's not. Actually, no. I'm going to dovetail off of that. There was, and I was reading the literature, and it says that there's going to be a gap. And what happens if we don't meet that goal with the hotel? Will it just go away, or will it extend the program where it'll extend out to 10 more years, or will it just sit there idly forever?
I can take a first pass at that before having Wayne, if he wanted to add in the mysterious voice head. So the goal is to close the funding gap because the Crestview Hotel project was awarded funding of about $16.7 million through the state's Home Key program. If there is a funding gap, construction will not be able to begin. So the goal for the city and the county and the developer is to close that funding gap so that construction can begin, because there are both expenditure deadlines as well as project completion deadlines associated with the Home Key funds. And if those are not met, then we will be in big trouble. So there isn't an option really to have the project being idle, because construction has to begin. And I'll ask Wayne if he wanted to add in to that.
Thank you, Harsha. No, that was a very comprehensive response, and we'll just say that all the parties who are working on this project are committed to moving the project forward and figuring out any remaining items that remain to make that happen. So everyone is very committed to meeting the state requirements as well as creating the units to serve the folks who will need these future housing units.
So my question, what happens if we don't meet it? Do we get the money back? And if that's the case, will it come back to us where we can redistribute it?
Staff?
Yes.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Sure. Yes. If the additional funding turned out to be more than what is needed, then we would work with the county, with the selected developer to figure out the ultimate financing and the where this additional funding would ultimately come from and be distributed. So if there were any additional funding that would come back to the city, then the goal would be to use the funds for the other affordable housing projects in the city's pipeline. And we have several that are lined up and projected over the next several years. So that's where we would look to apply any funds that are not used.
Thank you for that answer. But the last piece of that was, will that come back to us so we can decide if it goes?
Yes, funds allocated by the city would come back to the city.
Thank you.
While we're on the vein of questions, does anyone else on the commission have questions for staff?
Yeah, sorry. I guess I did have a general question, just more about the reporting process. My understanding with the Human Relations Commission was that commissioners would get a full report, or at least a binder of a lot of the applications that would be submitted by a lot of the CBOs here in order for us to do a much more informed judgment call about how the allocation of funds would go. Is there a reason why we weren't provided that this year, HRC, or? Yeah, that's my question.
I'm going to have Wayne lead with that answer.
Just thanks for that question. I think the intent was to try to summarize the submittals in the staff report, and then certainly always welcome the opportunity for our partners and applicants and subrecipients to be able to provide information here at the dais as well. One of the pieces that we could take back for future funding recommendations is if a binder would be helpful, whether digital or hard copy, we can incorporate that for future rounds if that would be useful for the commission.
Oh, I was just going to say, Wayne, lots of heads are nodding in the affirmative on the dais.
We will take that back and make sure to include that in future rounds. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions at this point among the commissioners, now is time to deliberate. It's a little more complicated now that we have a much longer list to discuss than we did earlier. So it's time to revisit the question, do we wish to accept the staff's recommendation for proportional funding, or do we wish to look at changing funding for any of the specific organizations that we've heard from or have heard from today or seen in the report? It's a question comment. There is a question definitely embedded there. I'm trying to figure out if my fellow commissioners have preliminary thoughts on that.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's pretty evident, just from what we've heard tonight and what staff reported to us, that all applicants have a need for these funds, and it would be put into a valuable resource, which is to serve our community members in Mountain View, and by that extent, even further along with throughout the county. So, but with that being said, I think I still find myself kind of conflicted because I feel like there's still some components being missed throughout the process that I still don't understand fully, despite the briefings and what's been presented in front of us by staff. So I don't just want to go with, let's just go with staff recommendations, because that would be the easy way out. I feel that since our community-based organizations did take the time to come to talk to us about what the process is like, how this implicates their services, and what that would mean in the long term. I get Crestview. The housing there is very important, especially that we're trying to close the gap there. And also there is an immediate need of service of residents here who are also requiring that service, which we would see, I would assume a quick turnaround on it and results. So I think that's just my feelings on this right now.
If I may, I'd like to make a clarifying comment. The Crestview allocation is part of CDBG funding that is towards capital projects. In terms of funding that is available for public service activities, it is capped at 15% of the available funds, and the recommendation includes using the entire 15% for an allocation towards public service activities.
I'm going to jump in there. So of the top 6, the highest across our CDBG and our general fund, 2 of the highest are on DWC, but I didn't get very much information on that funding, and I was wondering if I could get any more information or clarification on these 2, as they are some of our biggest allocations. I feel like I would like to know more about where that money is going, because I have some very reasonable needs and wants in this room, and looking into their eyes and telling them no is a lot harder than looking at the top and looking at numbers.
The Day Worker Center had applied for 2 programs. One is the Healthy Meals program, and the other is the Education, Skill Training, and Job Placement program. The Education, Skill Training, and the Education, Skill Training, and Job Placement program works with providing skills and training to day workers. The Day Worker Center is there aren't too many organizations that work with day workers in the North County, so they are one of, I believe they're the only organization in the North County, or maybe one of very few, which is why this program does serve a unique need. And then for the Healthy Meals program, like you heard today from some of the applicants who were present at this meeting, but then also other applicants who applied for the program, there are other programs that have funding for providing meals, but each program, the need is high, and I think you heard that in the sentiments echoed by the different representatives from the nonprofits. But the meals that are provided to different populations.
Thanks for the clarification.
I'm going to talk to my fellow commissioners. Since I've gone through this before, and we've had some long deliberations over how the funds are divided, an equal distribution, it may not seem that it's fair, because there's some that you may personally feel that need more. But the hard part in having people here speaking is determining, it's basically the last one that spoke gets the most, right? Because you're feeling this heartfelt desire to give to that organization what they want. So the first one is basically left out, or the one that's not here speaking is left out, because you don't hear their story. What I looked at tonight when I'm listening to these individuals is, what's going to make me take money away from them? that we're allocating. It's not giving more. It's what can I do to take away from the people that are in need. I can't take money away from the seniors that need food, right? I can't take away from people with domestic violence issues, right? So how else am I going to give the funds to the other organization that's really pulling at my heartstrings? So an equal distribution based on our funding seems like a fair decision. We have a floor, and they're at that floor. There was one that was slightly below it, but that was one where we didn't have implemented before. So everyone's getting something, and it's getting something close to what they're asking for. So that's where I'm comfortable with making the decision to move ahead with staff's recommendations personally, because of that. You hear it, and we've heard, you watch a great film and you want to do everything for that one, but then the next film comes along and you got your heartstrings pulled at that one as well. You're like, oh man, that was the best film ever, right? So it's kind of, you got to look at the whole body and see what we're trying to accomplish. And what we're trying to do is help as many citizens in the community as possible, and looking at it as an equal funding, we're going to accomplish that, in my humble opinion.
If I may piggyback off of part of that, in grant making, there are two schools of philosophy about evaluating grants at the highest level. One is to allocate proportionally if everyone in general is equally credible applicant and has equal impact on, roughly equal impact on the community. The other school of thought in grant making and professional grant making is to give more money where you believe it'll have the most leverage and impact. It's really, in this case, I've been thinking a lot about this, especially after what Javier just said and also what Eric said. I don't feel I have enough information to make a terribly well-informed opinion about the impact side. I could argue it for hours. I've heard some very credible comments in the room, but I'm still short on some of the information I would make to make an overall assessment of the impact of allocating funds differently than in the staff recommendation. That's where I'm currently at, but I would love to hear more comments on this.
Sorry, I'm jumping back on the same horse real quick. Because the DWC has two different things in here, because they've compartmentalized their needs into two different things. And I'm wondering if now everyone is going to come back and compartmentalize their needs into different needs so that we address them separately in future cases. So that's where I'm interested in how this is going to play out and how this works previously, I'll be honest, because it's my first time, and how, yeah, because they're asking for two separate, I get that there's two separate entities going on, but I know that other people are doing multiple things with their allocation. So why is this one so separate?
If I may, the total amount that the DWC is requesting is still receiving the same proportional allocation. And so in that respect, it is equal to the other agencies.
And I'd like to add to that, this is not the first time that we have had agencies apply for programs. So with taking the example of the Community Services Agency, for example, they have applied for 3 very distinct programs in the general fund and the CDBG. In the past, we have also had Life Moves as another nonprofit. They have applied for support for operating Graduate House, which is a shelter, as well as their homelessness-related services programs. So this does align with past practices that we've seen from agencies that have distinct programs to apply for funding separately for those programs. And in fact, that is encouraged because CDBG funding in particular has monitoring and compliance requirements, which includes data reporting on population served as well as their demographic data. So if organizations apply for funding for particular programs, it makes it easier to track outcomes and monitor performance.
I thank you, staff, for that. But I think this goes back to my original comment, which is it would have been great to know that prior to this moment where we're barely being informed about that. And I think it would have led to a much more proper conversation of like backtracking and seeing the past data to now, and how can we make a good judgment call on how do we serve all these CBOs.
I'm seeing some commissioners, I think, ready to jump in with another comment. So I want to, no, you. So if I'm hearing correctly, several of us feel we don't have enough information to make a decision different or not terribly different than accepting the staff report. I do want to acknowledge the comments, though, and questions about why we don't have more information and why how certain applicants have applied in multiple different ways. I want to acknowledge that there's some confusion in our process, and I think we're working through that. I'm tempted to take a straw poll. I think that comment alone just triggered Commissioner Baird to say something.
I mean, still formulating my thought, but so I'm brand new to this, I'm first time on a commission, so still kind of figuring out, what it means to be doing this work. And definitely appreciate the conversation about, how much background information do we need? And like I'm somebody that I love to dive into the details. I would love to read everyone's applications and get, really deep into it. But I also just want to acknowledge that, I trust the staff to do very good work on this. And I have a feeling that even if given all the background info, so I guess what I'm struggling with right now is that on one hand, I don't want to make a decision without having all the information. But on the other hand, I'm 90% sure that given all the information, I would agree with the staff's recommendation anyway. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I don't want to like hold things up just because of that. But so I don't know. I'm going to not make a hard stance here, but basically I would love more information, but I also feel that the staff does a good job of, vetting applicants and providing good summarized information. So I feel like I would probably end up agreeing anyway.
I'm going to second that. I feel a little bit like over a barrel. You have to pull a trigger, and I'm like, well, I kind of want to know what's in the barrel. Just like let me know a little bit more information, or like, yeah, a little bit more on the facts next time, because yeah, I feel kind of catch-22 in a lot of regards.
I agree with my fellow commissioners, but I think the main thing we need to bear in mind is, times are tough now, and especially the impact of COVID-19. It's a result of what we're seeing, and for those of us who have been on the commission, we've gone through this process, and we know that the staff are very thorough. And I think what I was pleased to see this time is, even though nobody's getting 100% of what they asked for, I still feel like it was fair to at least everyone got something. And I think maybe that's why we also asked the question. We know there's a gap, and we asked the question, how are you going to make up for that gap? Everybody has to also do something on their own to appreciate, the value of what they're providing. And so I also feel like most that I wouldn't want to shift anything from what the staff has recommended. I know the first time we went through this, we made a lot of shift and calculations and, and all of that. But I think whether you're present here or not, Just having gone through all the summary of what was provided, I feel confident in what the staff has done, so I'll rather leave things the same. Thank you.
I just want to take us a step back in the process and acknowledge and thank staff, including Wayne, who's here virtually. We appreciate all the work you do. I know how much work it is to evaluate grants, and especially how much work is behind the scenes of these reports. So I feel we all want to say thank you for that. I think where the disconnect is something we can talk about for the future. I know in the past, it was an exceptional burden for staff to provide the binders of information and literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of information. So I appreciate the need to cut that back. I've heard a few pieces of data that may be helpful in the future. So maybe there's a way to add, maybe 10 or 20% more that would satisfy the need that we have without dramatically increasing staff load. But thank you very much for doing the work you are doing.
If I may, Chair.
Didn't quite hear that.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you to you and to the commission as well. We will definitely take this back and work with you to figure out the right level of information, whether it's a full binder or if it's a digital copy or key parts of the application for future funding rounds. Mm-hmm. And we would also like to continue briefings that we typically do in the fall with the commission. So I know that last year, towards the end of the year, we held one of those briefings as well and sought commission input on funding parameters. I think this discussion has identified potentially new funding parameters that you might want us to bring back in a future cycle to get your input, and we can incorporate those funding parameters and principles into future rounds. So I think there is definitely opportunity to continue to build on past practices, but also to incorporate some new pieces as well to continuously improve the process and make it easier for the commission to deliberate. So we really appreciate the thoughtful discussion.
Thank you, Wayne. We really value the collaboration and the chance to continually improve the processes we are all doing here together. With that said, I'm hearing consensus to accept staff's recommendations as written. Quick straw poll or show of hands if that, or is there, we may need more deliberation.
Point of order, do we have to make a motion?
We do. I'm just trying to see if there's an appetite to make one right now.
I'll make
and if anyone would like to make the motion, I would be happy to hear it now.
I just want one quick on the record that I would like to know, as soon as I possibly could, how much of the DWC's funding comes directly from us, because 1/3 of what we're giving out is going to them on this second panel here. So 1/3 of the funding out of this page is going straight to them. I don't know. I understand the need of meals and I understand the need of training and that kind of stuff, but I want to see, like everyone else is talking about their other forms of funding, their other outreaches, their other stuff. Are we their only funding or that kind of stuff? For future reference, I just want it on the record that I would like to know more, especially on with something getting 1/3 of the money on this page. I get that there's 2 pages, but on this page, 1/3 of the money is going somewhere, and I didn't get any information. And I just feel bad because I heard a lot of other information, and I love to know where this is all going.
I can respond for the Healthy Meals program. It's the funds that are being requested would be about 15% of their total budget. And I can come back with data for the job skills and placement program. But sorry, if you could just point me to the page, was it for the... Okay, go on, yeah.
Sorry, the breakdown on slide 9, it's a little bit less than 1/3. It is technically, I think, 28% of the money here. But still, it's pretty close to 1/3 of the funds coming out of this page are going to food and training, and I understand that, but there was 3 other people on here that were doing food and training for other people. So I just wanted to make sure that that kind of divide.
Sure. Yeah, I can look up the number for the job skills and training program. And then again, I just wanted to reiterate that everyone who has applied would be getting 78% of the funding for general fund applications for all programs.
I want to see if there's a reason why somebody makes a request for $6,000 and they're like, well, maybe I should just ask for $40,000 because I'll have a better chance of getting it. Or I want to know if there's if we can better allocate, not just asking for the moon because you'll know your land amongst the stars, to recognize this money that they're asking for, a reasonable amount in that regard or something along those lines. Just thoughts.
Sure.
One piece of information that we could share here is that, and as noted in the staff report, originally the Day Worker Center requested $40,000 in the job skills training program as part of the CDBG funding bucket. One analysis that took place was that if the Day Worker Center requests remain there, that would actually make the CDBG requests even more oversubscribed and would cause the funding proportion to be even lower than 74%. That was one factor in shifting them down to the general fund bucket for that activity. And then that allowed the funding proportionality to be dispersed a little bit more evenly across the 2 buckets. So we did want to flag that for you in terms of the thought process there. In this situation, having the Day Worker Center shift down helped to provide more funding for CDBG for the other applicants.
And if I may add, for more context, as part of the reporting requirements for both CDBG and General Fund, for example, for the Day Worker Center programs, majority of the funding would go towards staffing costs. As part of the reporting requirements, when nonprofits submit their invoices for reimbursement, they are required to provide backup documentation. So for example, if the funds are being used towards staffing costs, there is a breakdown of the number of hours that the staff has worked, the rate, and so they would, all nonprofits, for whatever activities are being funded with these funds, they are required to provide backup documentation to support those invoices.
Commissioner Smith, did that help answer your question?
Sure.
Enough to move forward comfortably. Thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Poicone, I see that you're, yes, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you again to all the organizations that came tonight to speak to us. It took a great chunk of time, but know that our hearts are always with you and that we support y'all's mission. So with that, I move to pass staff recommendation of the the recommendation of the fiscal year for 2023 and 2024 for the Community Development Block Grant and the Home Investment Partnership funding.
I would like to second that motion.
We will take a hand-held vote. All in favor? I see no no's and therefore no abstains as well. Thank you very much. I know that process is difficult. It's complicated, it's lengthy, and most importantly, it's very, very difficult to say no to people, all of which are doing wonderful work and all of which you have growing needs. So thank you for letting us take part in that. With that said, we have one major substantial item on the agenda. I would like to encourage us to take a 5-minute break.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If someone would make a motion to take a break in the meeting.
I motion that we take a 5-minute break, returning at 9:00 something, 9:13. 13, I got that wrong. 9:11.
9:11. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Tell me more. Sit down. Tell me more.
No, I was just going to get a card from
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, go for it. Thanks. Yeah. Like annual reports. Like, what do you want? No, yeah, I'm getting over bronchitis. Oh. I mean, this is gonna be like that. I'm an inhaler kit for the next like month, so. No, it's no fun. How are you doing? It's a lot. This is. There are other big ones, but this is the biggest one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I kind of understand like some of the commissioner's frustration.
Yeah, well, and I think.
Which is cool, but no.
So here's the deal, too. It's like here, please take six. Sometimes the process of the past has been so unwieldy that it just there's a balance between too much information and enough information. And this may have been a little less information and some context for that too. It's like I'm new to staffing the HRC. Half of our HRC is our community housing and neighborhood services staff is new, and
I call our meeting back to order at 9:12. Oh. Oh, I thought she was, someone said she was just over there.
Oh, it's right here. Okay. No, you were on the phone. Outside there.
Yeah. How'd you sneak in? You
I
coming
didn't see
from
when you came.
Take a break.
I think it's next, not next week, yes.
The chair has already called the meeting back to order, and we can proceed with the agenda.
I'll just stall a little to make sure everyone's ready. We are ready. Item 6.2, overview and approval of the Grant Home ARP allocation plan. The Human Relations Commission will hold a public hearing to review the draft home investment partnerships program and consider a recommendation of approval to council. Action will be taken on this item. Housing Specialist Harsha Ramchandani, sorry. Oh, I'm a little tired. Will present this item. Assistant Community Development Director Wayne Chen and Stephanie Jennings, Senior Housing and Community Development Technical Assistant Advisor with the Cloudburst Group, are available virtually to answer questions. We will now have the staff presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. The purpose for this presentation is to provide members of the Human Relations Commission a brief overview of the Home Investment Partnerships American Rescue Plan, or Home ARP, program, particularly the draft allocation plan, which is required to be submitted in order to receive the funds. Staff is recommending tonight that the HRC approve the funding recommendations identified in the Home ARP allocation plan for Council consideration at the March 14 Council meeting. Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act in 2021, which included $5 billion in home ARP funds to help communities across the country address the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on particularly vulnerable populations. I just wanted to make a note that this is separate from the ARPA funding that was received directly by the city. This one-time funding is administered through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, home program. The city is an entitlement jurisdiction or participating jurisdiction, which enables the city to receive grants on a formula basis for the home program directly from HUD. The city's one-time home ARP allocation is $982,560. Each home ARP grantee is required to develop an allocation plan per the template provided by HUD in order to receive its home ARP funds. As shown on screen, there are 4 eligible groups of recipients known as qualifying populations that can be assisted by home ARP funds. The city's allocation plan outlines how the city plans to spend its home ARP funds. HUD has established a set of required actions for the allocation planning process, which includes consultations with entities serving the qualifying populations, as well as data collection regarding unmet needs and system gaps. Based on the unmet needs and gaps analysis, jurisdictions can use their home ARP funds for specific eligible activities, which are shown on screen. These include supporting the development of affordable rental housing, supportive service programs, operating support for organizations implementing a home ARP activity, and planning and administration costs. Home ARP funds must be used to serve all the qualifying populations. The consultation process was from the period March through November 2022. It included a set of 10 virtual stakeholder consultation sessions, an online stakeholder survey, and an extensive analysis of multiple data sources. The consultation sessions and surveys sought to engage service, shelter, and housing providers, as well as others with knowledge of the home ARP qualifying populations across the community. The survey included a series of questions to gauge the level and type of need for housing, shelter, and services for each of the home ARP qualifying population. Overall, the city received input from 17 individuals across 15 organizations, with at least one organization from each of the required organization types being consulted in the development of the city's allocation plan. The stakeholder consultations and survey results are described in detail in the Home ARP allocation plan, which was included as an attachment to the memo. Across the consultation sessions and through the survey, stakeholders identified high unmet need for the following activities relative to the other eligible activities. Affordable rental housing was the first activity identified. While stakeholders described a need for both short and long-term housing solutions, they also underscored how the lack of affordable and available permanent housing options for lower-income communities strains the existing housing and shelter inventory. More supportive services was identified as the next activity with a high unmet need. Case management was ranked as the most needed supportive service for each qualifying population. Housing search assistance and counseling, mental health services, landlord and tenant liaison services, and food assistance made up the top 5 ranked supportive services identified in the survey. The data highlighted the needs identified in the stakeholder consultation sessions and surveys for more affordable rental housing options and expanding the availability of supportive services, particularly for individuals experiencing homelessness and persons fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. The needs assessment and gaps analysis also highlighted gaps in the current shelter and housing inventory. For example, gaps within the current affordable rental housing inventory and the current supportive services delivery system, including the need for improved coordination between service providers at the local and regional level. Input received through the consultation process, along with quantitative data analysis, identified priority areas of need and directly informs the allocation recommendations in the city's Home ARP allocation plan. Based on the analysis, the priority areas of need are developing affordable rental housing and supportive services as shown on screen. Funding allocated towards affordable rental housing would supplement ongoing city efforts to develop additional affordable rental housing units. The city does not intend to give preference to any specific qualifying population, but may include a preference in the provision of supportive services for victims' services for individuals experiencing homelessness and persons fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. In addition, staff recommends an allocation of 1% towards operating support to give nonprofit organizations funds for administrative support and operating expenses, such as rent, utilities, and training for staff. This will help streamline operating their supportive service programs. Staff is also recommending an allocation of up to the statutory limit towards administration and planning costs to enable building staff capacity for the management, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation of the Home ARP program. Eligible costs include developing systems to comply with Home ARP requirements, developing interagency agreements, and monitoring activities for compliance, and preparing documentation for submittal to HUD. Home ARP is a new source of federal funding with its own unique program requirements. The table shown on screen breaks down the activities recommended for funding, the amount for funding, what that would be as a percentage of the total allocation, and if there are any HUD allocation limits applicable. Information analyzed from the consultation sessions, the stakeholder survey, and the quantitative data demonstrates that there are high levels of unmet needs faced by all 4 of the home ARP qualifying populations. While the city's home ARP allocation of $982,560 is meaningful and supplements ongoing city funding towards various programs, this is a limited one-time funding, and more funding is needed to completely address the housing, shelter, and service needs for each of the qualifying populations. Given the limited resources available, as well as the priority areas of need identified in the needs assessment and gaps analysis, prioritizing affordable rental housing and supportive services can help meet the needs of all 4 qualifying populations. Doing so will help ensure that the home ARP eligible activities have the greatest impact and best meet the needs of some of Mountain View's most vulnerable communities. If the HRC recommends and forwards the home ARP allocation to Council, it would go to Council for final consideration and approval on March 14. The draft allocation plan is currently posted on the city website and has been noticed for a 15-day public comment period from Feb 24th through March 12th. The final home ARP allocation plan will be submitted to HUD by the March 31st deadline. This concludes staff's presentation. Staff and our consultant are now available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, questions?
Thank you again for all the work y'all have done. I did have a question. I think the one for me is on slide 8 regarding the supplemental efforts to develop additional affordable rental housing options. Would a portion of those funds be also going to the Crestview hotel in order to shorten the gap, or will it be used for other housing opportunities?
The HUD allocation plan template is recommended to identify eligible activities without identifying specific projects. At this, there will be a process for identifying projects. The city has an affordable housing projects pipeline, and the city would continue to work with developers in the pipeline to identify the best use of those funds. I would also like to invite Wayne and Stephanie if they might like to jump in and add to that.
Thanks, Harsha. Just to note that given the timing of the home ARP funds and the timing of the Crestview project, we are not currently anticipating Crestview to be part of the pipeline for these funds. The intent is that these home ARP funds for affordable housing would go to other projects based on the timing of Crestview and the home ARP plan.
Thank you.
Just for my own understanding, it sounds like, I guess what I'm getting from this is that this is much more of a framework. Like, we know we have this money coming from this one-time source, and we're not getting into the nitty-gritty of, what projects, we're not talking about, what organization should get what. It's basically just, we have this much money that is going to come in, and here's generally what we want to spend it on, and we're going to figure out the details as the next steps of this process. Is that correct?
That's fair to say. So there are 4 qualifying populations that the funds must serve, and it's not that all the activities that are recommended should serve all populations, but overall the funds in its entirety, regardless of which activities and how preferences might be set up for qualifying populations, overall the funds should serve all 4 qualifying populations. And there is also a limited set of eligible activities that the funds can be applied to. So based on the analysis from the consultation sessions and the data, staff is recommending that these funding recommendations go to these activities. And for the affordable housing projects, there isn't a preference at this time. But based on the data analysis, there may be a preference for supportive services for 2 qualifying populations, individuals experiencing homelessness and persons fleeing or attempting to flee domestic or sexual violence or human trafficking.
Can we go back to the slide? The one with the data on it. Yep. Yep. There we go. So I'm curious about, and this is what we got into last year with the percentages and how things were split. And we're seeing that the nonprofit operations is getting 1% when their limit is 5%. Before you answer, I saw the little red light come on. I see, based on what we saw today and what we heard, the operating expense is so critical to these nonprofits. And I'm wondering if we could possibly move a little funds around to kind of give, because it's a one-time shot, right? Just like a shot in the arm for them to maybe help them give some other service that they can provide, or help boost like something that's falling apart in their building that they don't have to worry about us looking over their shoulder to account for it. If we could do something like that, maybe boost it up to 2% or 2.5%. Because all the work that they have to do just to get that money, also you want to take that into consideration as well. To get a measly $5,000, is it really worth it? Because we've had this conversation in the past as well. They got to do all that work to get that. I would like to see if we could possibly shift some, do a lift and shift. And I know we could take it out of the 79%, but you know, who's it going to affect? I mean, it's a tricky one. It's a very tricky one. But I know that like you said, they pull at our heartstrings with their comments, and this is where we could actually make that difference.
If I may. So just wanted to clarify that for the supportive services, that is city funding that would be provided for supportive services, which would include staffing costs, which is what most nonprofits typically apply for. The operating costs are for administrative expenses like rent, utilities, training of staff, buying a printer, so just administrative expenses that would streamline their operations, which is why that was kept at a lower amount to give the flexibility to nonprofits. But it would really be $50,000 that would be available to allocate to nonprofits to essentially run the programs and pay for staffing costs. And to answer the second part of your question, commissioners may make recommendations for changing the allocation because both supportive services and affordable rental housing were identified as high unmet needs.
Thank you. I have a question that may go to Javier's point. 15% is allocated to administration and planning, and that says building staff capacity among everything else. Can you clarify the difference between the nonprofit operating and the administration and planning? Because that does add up to 16%. I'm just trying to understand if that might address Javier's question.
Sure. The 15% for administration and planning is to administer the home ARP program. So that would be for city staff and if the city engages consultants. So for example, the city worked with the Cloudburst group to help prepare the allocation plan. So costs for their technical assistance as well as city staff costs to prepare the documentation that's required to submit to HUD, but also to work with the grantees that would be identified for the affordable rental housing as well as the supportive services on an ongoing basis as they administer the program to ensure that the city and by extension the sub-grant recipients are in compliance with the program requirements.
Thank you for clarifying that. That helps me. I was also wondering, so we addressed kind of why is nonprofit operating costs so small, and then you gave the helpful clarification that nonprofit operating costs is a more specific category where it's more like admin stuff. It's not necessarily the overall administration of programs. I guess my question is, and I'm sure there's a reason for it, but why bother separating them? If the goal is to give them more flexibility, like why are we taking out the 1% to earmark as something special? Is that like required by, the rules for using this program, or I guess just why bother?
That's a great question. So there isn't a requirement for the operating costs. There is an allocation limit of 5%, and that was really built in to give staff flexibility as well as the non-profits that are selected as the sub-recipients if that is funding that they would like to use and if that would be helpful for them to administer their program. Because it would be harder for us to go back and allocate costs towards activities that were not identified in our allocation plan.
I'm sorry, I might just have not been paying enough attention. Can you say that one more time? I didn't quite process it.
Sure. So the call out for operating costs was to provide flexibility to nonprofits that might be selected to as sub-recipients for the home ARP funding to provide supportive service programs if they need it, because it would be if the operating costs were not called out and we had that amount as zero, and it was then, and if it is identified down the path that having administrative overhead or flexibility to use expenses for administrative overhead expenses, it would be harder to go ahead and make a change in the allocation plan that is submitted to HUD if it was not called out in our allocation plan to begin with. So this is to give flexibility to the nonprofits that might be selective for supportive services.
Okay, so just sorry, just to make sure I really understand. Oh, sorry, I think you want to go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say, I may have missed it, but we actually do have our Cloudburst consultant who helped us put together this home ARP plan, Stephanie Jennings, who is also connecting via Zoom. And I think Stephanie may be able to also provide some additional information if that would be helpful. So I'd like to ask Stephanie to unmute and provide some context here.
Yeah, I love it.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners, and I apologize, another disembodied voice for you this evening. So to answer the question that I understand you're asking, so the way HUD set up the eligible activities, they have separated the supportive services from the nonprofit operating support. And then there's another category called nonprofit capacity building. And so it does, these two funding sources, types of funding do have to be separated within the allocation plan.
Thank you, that answers my question.
Okay.
So if this is not needed, then what happens to that 1%? So you said if, just in case, like almost sounds like a buffer. If they will need it. So if it's not used, then what happens?
This could be, so reallocation is allowed within the allocation plan. So if there isn't a need, this could be reallocated towards supportive services.
Okay, good.
Stephanie, do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's not a use it or lose it situation. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
I guess I have a comment, because I guess for me, it kind of makes sense to remove the nonprofit operating fund, the 1%, and then reallocate that to the supportive services. That's kind of just my train of thought, but be that as it may. I did have a question about slide 6. Who were the stakeholders that were consulted with? Were they a combination of organizations that were part of the emergency agency network, or a combination of also the 15 organizations y'all consulted?
I can take a first pass at that, and then I'll defer to Stephanie to provide a detailed list of the consultation of the stakeholders who were consulted. So the city and Cloudburst had consultation sessions with the county Office of Supportive Housing for learning more about the Continuum of Care program that serves the qualifying populations. It also interacted with the County Housing Authority and then public agencies and nonprofit organizations that serve the qualifying population, each of the qualifying populations. But I now defer to Stephanie to provide some more detail.
Sure, I can look up that list of the different agencies that were included in the process. So hold on just one moment. And this is also in the plan. So let me just find the correct page.
Oh, I found the list, Stephanie. I can read it out.
Okay, great.
Okay. So as part of the regulatory requirements, we had to have consultation sessions with homeless service providers, domestic violence service providers, veteran groups, public housing authorities, continuum of care agencies, and other public agencies that address the needs of the qualifying populations, as well as public or private organizations that address fair housing, civil rights, and the needs of persons with disabilities. Based on that guidance, for the 10 virtual stakeholder consultation sessions, staff reached out to Nextdoor Solutions, Law Foundation of Silicon Valley Independent Living Center, Day Worker Center of Mountain View, Community Services Agency, the County Office of Supportive Housing, the County, YWCA, and as well as affordable housing developers and the County Housing Authority. Details of the consultations as well as those who took the survey are included in the consultation process of the Home ARP allocation plan.
Thank you.
Seeing no further, well, maybe. Yeah. Seeing a question.
And I just have a question about the timeline of this, and I apologize if it's in the report and I just didn't read it carefully enough. But so all the stakeholders you're mentioning, like YWCA and all them, maybe start to think about how we just had this tough conversation about their funding. And I'm wondering, for the timeline of this funding, is it going to be a similar process where they can apply and then there'll be a similar set of staff recommendations for percentage of allocations? I guess I'm just kind of wondering, since we're looking at the acronym GB, the other one, funding for the next 2 years for all these organizations, a lot of them are looking at shortfalls. Is it possible that this money could help supplement them, or is this like on a totally different track?
I would say it's on a related track because the Home ARP funds must serve for qualifying populations. So some of the programs that are operated by the nonprofits who applied for CDBG and General Fund would be eligible to apply for supportive services that serve the qualifying populations. Like we mentioned in the memo, for supportive services, the city may include a preference for 2 of the 4 qualifying populations. If a preference is not included, then the city would conduct a process similar to the NOFA that is issued for CDBG and General Fund public service activities, which would in that case then be open to all nonprofits that offer programs that would serve all 4 of the qualifying populations.
Thank you.
Question about what happens after the NOFA process. Who will be reviewing staff's recommendations? Will that go to council directly?
I'm going to defer to Wayne on that one because I'm not sure if that would come to the HRC first before going to council or not.
Thanks for the question. So in terms of next steps, then the recommendations from the commission will be forwarded to the city council. So that's the immediate next step. Once that is approved, then we would work and we work with Stephanie to determine the distribution method and timing. And I believe, and maybe I can ask Stephanie to chime in, is we could include in that process a bring back to the commission for input. So So that could be something that we could build into the process following council approval and the submittal of the home ARP funds. So I'd like to just pause and see if Stephanie can provide any additional color in terms of the nonprofit selection process.
Yes, I'd be happy to jump in. You really have options in terms of how you decide to distribute your funds. And so different communities have different methods. And so this is something in the allocation plan itself, you don't have to provide a lot of detail regarding that particular issue. And generally, because of the deadline, HUD is recommending that communities move forward with their allocation plan, get those in by the deadline, and then think about implementation.
Thank you, Stephanie. So if the HRC has any feedback on process, we're happy to take it here and build that in, or we could return back to the HRC at a later date.
Thank you, Wayne and Stephanie. Do we have input today, or would we rather it come back for recommendation?
If I may, Chair, would we want to have that conversation during the deliberation portion of the conversation?
Yes.
No worries.
Do we have any other questions from? We seem to generate more. The longer we sit here and think, the more we make. I'm going once. Going twice. I will now open the public hearing on this item. Would any member of the public like to comment on this item? If so, please submit a blue speaker card to staff. Unless you've already done so, each speaker will have 3 minutes. Did anyone submit from earlier that it left? Okay. No. There will be no public comment then. So thank you. I close the public hearing and bring the item back to the commission for deliberation and action. A motion will be required to take action on this item.
I just have a question on what our options are. I guess it's more, is it point of order when you ask a question about how to do stuff? Sorry, but I mean, are our options either, you know, motion to approve or motion to ask for more information, or just what do we need to decide here?
I think the solution space is fairly broad. I'll definitely have staff have my back on this, I hope. One would be to approve as is. Another would be to approve with modified allocations, which we talked a teeny bit about. I did just hear Wayne suggest that we could also discuss making requests for how we would like to participate in the process going forward. I suspect there may be other parts. I think we're still learning about home ARP.
Correct. And I would also defer to community development staff about this, but one consideration is the timeline that's required to submit this plan in order to receive any funds at all.
Right.
And these could be, like, as we said, the nonprofit operating could be reallocated. So most of this is actually fluid. We just need to submit something so we can get this money.
In essence.
In essence. The recommendations should be aligned with feedback received from the stakeholder consultations and the survey, as well as analysis from the data. So there is fluidity in terms of the amounts and the percentages that are allocated. But if we wanted to say allocate to an activity that is not mentioned here, there would have to be justification for that.
But most of that background's already been done by you, so we're pretty good.
So just to build on that information is probably the framework that the commission may want to use is, as Harsha is saying, that because of the stakeholder analysis, the needs assessment, and the data analysis, these funding recommendations in Table 2 of the staff report would be the data-supported activities that HUD needs to see. And so the HRC, as the chair mentioned, could recommend to council the amounts as shown, or if you would like to shift the funding around. And I would like to also confirm, I think based on conversation just a few moments ago, that the capacity building nonprofit operating line item is not a required funding item. So if the HRC wishes to, say, move that amount into supportive services, for example, that is an option. Or if you would desire shifting some of the funding from the affordable rental housing line item and put more towards supportive services, that is also an option as well, just to give some examples. So that may be a framework that the commission may wish to use.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's where my head is stuck. He sounds like also like a voice of higher power, which is crazy. But the reason why I'm thinking this, and I encourage my fellow commissioners to think of it this way as well. We just heard from a bunch of CVOs that the price of just providing these services are just getting more costly. And I feel that reallocating these nonprofit operating funds would be better use under the supportive services that are increasing, it looks like, for a lot of CBOs, but or whoever, those who may be accessing these funds.
I'd like to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, because, you know, my instinct is that, yes, everything's getting more expensive, and so why artificially earmark money, or why earmark money if we don't necessarily need to? But I remember earlier staff mentioned that basically the reasoning for this was that if we don't allocate something for nonprofit operating, it sounded like that there is a possible future where a nonprofit needs the kind of money that would be allocated here, and they have a hard time using the supportive services fund for it. Is that correct? I mean, can you give me I know it's a hypothetical, but like, what's an example of a time or of a situation where a nonprofit might say, oh darn, you know, if only this was earmarked nonprofit operating, this would really help?
I think before I respond, I think it might be helpful to have Stephanie weigh in on if an activity is not allocated in the allocation plan and then funding was to be allocated to it, to walk through what that process might look like, and then I can come back and respond to that question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. So essentially, I mean, this is your budget. You're putting your money into these different buckets, and then you are figuring out how to allocate them. If you change or want to change the money amongst the buckets, it will need to go back through a substantial amendment process and to be approved by HUD. And so you can make those changes, but it does take some time to do that, to do the public process and to do the approval process with HUD. And that, because this is a new funding source, there's still a lot that people are learning. There is reasonable anticipation that that may happen. It's also important to note that this money is different than other money in that it doesn't have to be spent until 2030. So knowing exactly how you're going to use those funds over an extended period is unlikely for most people. But you do want to try to get close to what you think you're going to use the money for in the beginning, so you can move forward with some of your activities.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that. I think with the earlier explanation that was given and getting the sense that this is not a lose it or, use it or lose it situation, I kind of look at it as more like having this reserve just in case. So I would prefer to leave it as is, because they're not going to lose it anyway. If it's needed, then it's there. if it's not needed, it's still okay. It's somehow to be allocated somehow. So, but at least giving it that tag or label as nonprofit operating, I think it's safe. I think it's like a safety net than just lumping everything into, supported services or someplace else. So I think it looks like a safe safety net. So I think I would leave it as is. Thank you.
This goes back to my point earlier. If it's just sitting there, what good is $5,000 going to do? Right. If we're going to have it as an emergency fund, let's have it where it has some impact. Right. So doing a lift and shift to from a different category would make this have more meaning. Say another $5,000. Take it out of supportive services, where it's there for one organization to make that big impact that they need.
This tends to happen when it gets late during these discussions. Some of those with history know this before. We start looking into the weeds and start spending an hour talking about how $5,000 gets allocated. So there is movement afoot to keep it to suggest that it's kept as is, and movement afoot to keep it, or to move it to where it's more needed. It's $5,000. I just want to put some perspective. We do, as Wayne said, also have the ability to reallocate funds from the development of affordable housing to supportive services if the true concern is that supportive services is underfunded and needs help. Of course, affordable housing is as well, but I just want to point out this option. Wayne brought it up, and I want to point out that there's a bigger bucket there. Just a point of order. So.
If I may, if it's helpful, Stephanie and the Cloudburst group have worked with a number of jurisdictions on their home ARP allocation plans and interacted with a lot of nonprofits. She could provide more perspective on feedback received from nonprofits about the operating costs that they are useful for them.
That would be helpful.
Stephanie?
Sure. So as part of our discussions, we did specifically ask all of the organizations that we spoke with, both about the needs for supportive services, affordable housing, and also what's happening with their own organizations. And as one of the commissioners mentioned, the costs are rising, both for implementing services and also for operating organizations. And we also recognize that this is a unique one-time funding source. There are startup costs with these activities. There are unique reporting requirements. And so some of this was just simply to recognize some of those additional requirements for agencies that may be using these dollars. I would also share that places sometimes use these funds, they offer them in combination with the other resources. So you're putting out a request for proposals for supportive services. You would allow them to apply for the supportive services and also couple that with the operating support. One requirement of this is that any agency that does receive the operating support has to be implementing a home ARP activity.
I think my general feeling is that I don't have a strong enough opinion one way or the other to want to change this significantly. I think that staff has done a lot of legwork to get it to this point, and working with a consultant who has worked with a lot of other jurisdictions and nonprofits. So I'm definitely open to further discussion, but for me personally, I do not have a strong opinion on changing it.
I'm not sure if this is useful or not, but we talked about that we weren't able to allocate money to all the money that people wanted earlier today. I just did a very quick back of the envelope calculation. I think for all of the agents or the organizations that approached us with requests for housing funds, we fell short, really bad back of the envelope, around 50K, just to point that out. I think all of those organizations theoretically could apply for this money going forward, I think. Just putting some perspective on that number.
If I may, I just want to clarify that we would have to go back and look at all the programs and see if they're serving the eligible qualifying populations.
Right. I was looking at housing programs that, in my quick estimation, from what I heard, would. So just trying to put some relative perspective on the number. So I've heard one person say they do not have enough information to make notable changes to the allocations as is. I'm not sure I've heard that voiced clearly by anyone else. And I don't know if I've heard anyone voice the idea just that they strongly feel that there should be changes made. So that's where we're at. Does anyone want to advocate for one side or another?
I second leaving it with the staff's hard work in organizing this, and they did the research. And worst case scenario, that something does not get, the nonprofit operating doesn't perfectly work out, we can reallocate that. So I don't see it being, or anything, we can reallocate it later on. But it is important that we agree to something soon, so we can submit this, so we can actually have this money. Because we can't even get this money to people that need it if we don't submit this as soon as possible.
Three of you haven't said anything specific about this?
I just want to say I second what Commissioner just recently said, because I think the rationale is very clear and straightforward. And I think you just stated it very clearly. I think the money is not going to be lost either way. So, and like you also said, the research has been done thoroughly. And I think, again, the rationale behind why this line item is there probably comes from the study and what they've seen working with other agencies or nonprofits. So I think there's a good sense to why this is there, and I think we should just support it. At least I do. Thank you.
Let's get that motion out there.
Eric, do you feel your voice has been heard?
Wait, all eyes on me. No, I think my mind, as we're discussing it right now, it's also, my question kind of goes to, of the agencies consulted, how many of them actually would access the home ARP of it? Because it's such a low percentage too, that also begs the question, why wasn't it a higher one, right? So would it really hurt removing it? I get the opinion of just leaving it and just kind of having it as a buffer, but also it's 1%. So would it really make a difference to shift it to the supportive services? As an example, but I'm also in favor of just going with what staff recommended, and if we need to later discuss it, then we will at that point.
That's a fair perspective. I think we have consensus. Would someone like to make a motion?
I motion that we approve staff recommendations. Do I have to say something more official than that, or?
A little bit more than that.
Oh, for home ARP funding recommendations.
I second.
All in favor? So that's unanimous. It passes. This portion of the evening is closed. I just want to say excellent work, hard work, confusing work, lots to think about, and some sad, difficult decisions to occasionally make. So thank you for sticking with it and sticking with and taking care of each other in that process. We have one more item on the agenda. Item 7, commission staff comments, questions, and commission reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the commission at this time. State law prohibits the commission from discussing or acting on substantial non-agenda items. Staff, I understand you do not have any reports for us.
Thank you, Chair Sylvester.
See ya.
And thank you.
Oh, and bye, Wayne and Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
Yes. I miss looking at the ceiling already.
Thank you. It was nice to talk with all of you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Chair Sylvester. Staff does not have any two brief updates for you. First of all, we may have a new commissioner joining the commission in the near future. The Council Appointment Review Committee completed interviews yesterday for the vacancy on the HRC, and will be recommending Joan McDonald to the council for appointment.
Welcome.
Not yet, don't jinx it. You can still applaud the recommendation. Great recommendation.
Thank you. And the next HRC meeting will be back in the Plaza Conference Room discussing potential council work plan projects.
You're taking my mic away from me?
Oh. Do any commissioners have anything they would like to bring up in item 7? Comments, questions, etc. No, please, no.
I just want to say thank you to all the staff, Laurel, Michael, for all the hard work y'all have done. It's not an easy process, clearly, but y'all made it as simple as possible for all of us. So thank you so much.
Bravo.
Second that.
Last
Thirded.
thing, I also want to say thank you to Laurel for dealing with all of our crazy schedules this last month with all the subcommittees. I know it's been a pain, and we really, really appreciate you for doing that for us. And
She's looking really
let's
embarrassed.
get International Women's Month going strong.
That's right, it's March. Awesome. I second the thanking of Laurel. I know it's been a very, I don't know what the last month was like. It was weird. It was, we all have spring fever and we're all running in a million different directions more than normal. So thank you for putting up with us. And in the rain and in everything. Yes, I'll blame it on the weather. So seeing no other comments from, oh, I see a finger over the button.
Go ahead. She's going to miss this microphone.
I know we're kind of still divided on the binders, non-binders for future reference.
Correct.
I thought it would be helpful to maybe do at least a page informational something per, just kind of slight informationals, just due to some of the ones that were here, we did get a lot of information on. And then, it was basically and now that you got that information, you don't act on it. In some regard, it felt like that. So it would just be helpful to. And then if I kind of got, at least literally, if I had gotten slides, what was that? Slides 8 and 9, a week beforehand. If I had gotten slides 8 and 9 beforehand, I could have asked my questions, asked some of the questions, and I think dissolved half of my own hang-ups. I don't know if that would have helped anybody else. Because, again, looking over, and I get that, they moved that one from, it was on page 8, but it moved on to page 9. And it did change, but it was still 2/5 of all of the requests over $40,000. And we didn't get any information on it, really. But very minimal information on it. So just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. In the absence of our other staff who are presenting tonight, I will say that I did hear that they very much heard your feedback. And as Community Development Director Wayne Chen mentioned, we will likely return with CDD staff in the fall for a briefing on the CDBG and home process for the commissioners, which may include, based on the feedback tonight, a discussion of what both the funding priorities are, as Harsha mentioned, and then what the process might be for this discussion or how to support it. And I will certainly be sure to facilitate the conversation about between you and I about what is needed in order to help you do your job on the dais for these conversations.
I was also just wondering if there's a way to even encourage this agency representative to show up in person. I know the first year we went through this, there was a greater number of, even though it was via Zoom, but people were here to speak on behalf of their agencies. And our process is not to reward those who show up in person and penalize those who don't. I don't want it to get that kind of feel. That we're scrutinizing more, one more than the other. That's not the idea. But I think also if they took the time to go through the lengthy application process, at least they could send a representative to speak. Because if they're here for us to ask questions directly, I think it will help alleviate some of the, gaps. Instead of us trying to fill the gaps, or on, why they're requesting a certain amount or things like that. So that's just my little input to that. So I think that would have been helpful if we had more representation here than we usually have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Nokiru. And I'm taking down your comments as you're mentioning them this evening, and do recommend holding further comments for when we do have a discussion on it, just so that we're not entering into a more substantive discussion during this agenda item on a non-agendized item. But thank you. I am recording them and will be responsive to them.
Thank you. Seeing no other, thank you. Seeing no other comments, item 8, adjournment. We will adjourn to the next regular meeting of the Human Relations Commission, scheduled for April 6th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. in the Plaza Conference Room at Mountain View City Hall. We're adjourning at 10:09. Thank you.